Next is opportunity for anyone who wishes to make a public comment that is not on today's agenda. If you just state your name for the record and keep your comments to about 3 minutes, that would be great. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jan Hamilton. I know most of you. And I've been told that if I'm not careful, I'm going to get charged on my tax rate for the amount of paperwork I've given you. So please accept my apologies. I don't expect that you read all that. My former husband and 2 of my boys are lawyers, and so that means there's always a lot of paperwork backing up anything that we're standing for, or and that's what I'm doing. I am making a stand for equal human rights, and I'm enlisting your help. I've given all of you on the Commissioners Board a little favor today, and it says equality for all. It says love conquers hate. It says, who has the one that says less, more? That may be the yellow one over here with Mr. Ely. But anyway, this is the symbol for the Equal Rights Campaign, and I'd like to see the county adopt this as one of your priorities the next time you make a list of priorities. I think it's time in our country, and certainly in our town, since we passed a city ordinance in 1977 to protect against any discrimination against someone who loves another person of the same gender. And this simply says the mission of the Human Rights Campaign is embodied in the image on this sticker. You'll begin to see more and more of these on bumper stickers and in windows of cars. We envision an America where lesbian and gay people are ensured of their basic equal rights. And being aware, I had a young person in my office that came in one day and said, I'm going to get a gun and go to Aspen High School. I want to be a sniper. And you can imagine I did call the police, and they managed that beautifully. But it made me wonder, as I've been pondering this, what would happen in Aspen if we had a sniper like in the Naval Yard or in Sandy Hook or in Tucson or those places? And I feel sure you're covering that. But I just wanted to, out of my heart, because I now have a gay grandchild too, and you know, these kids are committing suicide, or they're killing each other, or they're doing all kinds of things that we later wish we'd done something about or known about. And so my comment today is just to bring awareness that, and you can probably see from my material, I went through an unfortunate situation of being arrested at the church I was going to when I'd gotten an invitation to be there that day, and have gone through, most of you know, 25 months in the Pitkin County Jail without trial. And then Judge Boyd dismissed the 27 felonies that the homophobic people had filed against me. And so I take that as an opportunity now to just say, okay, I think you've got my attention. Whoever it is, the higher power is saying, will you make a stand for equal human rights? And I have said yes. So if there's time for you to tell me what the county is doing to address this type of thing, I'd love to hear. If not, all of you have my email, and I'd like to get an email or whatever's appropriate. I want to work as a team with the county. And we have a big flag that looks like this that I'll be riding in the parades, waving the equal rights flag. Because I've had everything I've ever wanted, and I feel like it's time for me to give back. So that's my comment.
Well, thank you very much. And we'll maybe get back to you at some point with what we're doing in that regard. Anybody else wish to make any public comments today that is not on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment and bring it back for board comments. Any board comments? Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, George. You know, as we are enjoying this incredible fall weather, finally, I would just like to point out that October 1st is when the Colorado Health Insurance Exchanges formally open, and the website is Colorado Connects. There are obligations on employers, although without fine or penalty, to notify their employees of the exchange and how to go online and take a look at the insurance offerings that are now available to all Colorado residents, either as a private insurance or go through the math and see if you qualify for subsidy or support of that insurance. I believe the website is Colorado Connects.
I'm just checking.
Yeah, double checking for me. But I realized we weren't going to have another meeting, formal meeting, until later in October on the 9th. And so wanted to make sure people were aware of that. There's a lot of really good information on the website. People can describe it as a cross between Google and Kayak, and a chance to compare policies, offerings, coverages, doctors available in various systems, and things like that. So I think that that is a real step forward for Coloradan, and has an idea originally formulated by the Heritage Foundation that there should be no free riders on our health systems, that everyone should have some coverage, so there is not a transfer of that cost to those with private policies.
And I think the website is actually connectforhealth.com.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you, John, for the correction. So correctforhealthcolorado.com. It's a new day for healthcare in Colorado.
Thank you. Rob?
Just a quick public service announcement. So much great stuff happening in the fall here. Obviously the leaf peepings, obviously a lot of people coming into town, but one of our local nonprofits is our Film Fest organization is doing their Film Fest this weekend. A lot of great shows. Actually, the first show is starting right now, actually, a noon show today. Unfortunately, our meetings preclude us from going to that, but there's a great program for the Film Fest this weekend if anybody's looking for films.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to our consent action items. I'll read these off. If any of the commissioners want to pull any of these, just let me know. First are the minutes of work session of August 13th, August 27th, September 3rd, special meeting of August 27th, regular meetings of August 28th and 9/11. Next is a restatement of the Pickens County Public Employees Retirement Plan. Next is a resolution supporting the Northwest Colorado Council of Government Water Quality and Quantity Sections West Slope Principles for the Colorado Water Plan.
George, I'd like to just have a brief overview of number 2.
Okay? You ready to,
I'll make a motion for the other 2, approving the minutes of what's stated in our packet, 8/13, 8/27, 9/3, 8/27 and 8/28.
And 9/11.
And 9/11, as well as the resolution supporting the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments Water Quality and Quantity Sections West Slope Principles for the Colorado Water Plan.
Second.
okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Tom? Oken?
And I was just hoping for kind of a television overview of, for our public, what this is about, what we're approving here, and why we do this every 5 years, and just a little basic on the plan that we've got.
Sure. I'm Tom Oken, County Treasurer, and also the Chairman of the county's Retirement Board. And so the county maintains a retirement plan for its employees. That plan has to meet certain Internal Revenue Service standards, regulations, comply with all sorts of different laws. So we employ outside counsel that specialize in this to draft our plan. And every 5 years you have to update your plan to incorporate any changes in the law or regulations governing it. And then you have to submit it to the Internal Revenue Service for review and approval in order to have a qualified retirement plan that meets the Internal Revenue Code standards. So that's what's going on here, is we're doing a restatement of it that incorporates several changes in order to comply with changes in the law. One of those changes is to comply with Colorado's, what's it called? Look it up. The Colorado Civil Union Act. And so basically the changes to the plan to address that are to give partners in civil unions some of the rights under the plan with regard to disbursement of funds to them and stuff like that. Some do not apply, though, because a spouse under the plan is defined as a spouse that's defined in the Internal Revenue Code. And that's where the Supreme Court decision said that same-sex partners who are legally married are a spouse with respect to the code. So that applies there, but a civil union in Colorado is not a marriage, so that does not qualify them for spousal benefits under the Internal Revenue Code. So that's really probably the biggest change within the plan, other than, minor compliance issues.
And I wish Jan was here to hear some of that, because it directly applies to what she was talking about. One of the things that we're doing here is Picken County to create equal rights. A question that I often get is our plan fully funded?
Fully funded applies to what's called a defined benefit plan, which is your typical pension plan. You get so much of your salary upon retirement. Our plan is not that. Instead, it's called a defined contribution plan, in which the county contributes in a percentage of each employee's salary. The employees then direct the investment of those funds however they want, and what they get on the end is whatever it's accumulated to. So what's defined in that plan is the contribution, and to the extent it's fully funded, yes, we make that contribution up front, but we aren't guaranteeing how much that's worth on the back end.
And does the county have a defined, what was the other?
Defined benefit?
Defined
No,
benefit
we do not
plan.
have a defined benefit plan.
Even for our sheriff's department or any
No,
of that? Okay.
everybody's under one
A
plan.
contribution plan.
Here, our defined contribution.
Defined contribution plan.
Right.
Thanks.
Rachel?
Yeah, thanks for those questions, Rob, because they do come up a lot, and especially when you contrast that to the state system, which is the other type of plan where it's more of a pension plan. But we are fully funded. This is a request for in the future. I had brought this up when we talked to Danette not too long ago about the interplay between Social Security and a defined contribution plan. And there just is a lot of confusion out there, and she kind of acknowledged that it's something that employees are asking as well. If you had worked under the Social Security system for 20 years and then 20 years under Picken County system, does that, your savings through Picken County, count against your Social Security, or how do you prevent that from being kind of a penalty box? And I think it'd be great to have some sort of white paper at some point in time. Danette said she would be working on it because she had a lot of questions from her employees, but we still haven't seen anything yet. So if you have a chance to look at the interplay.
I'll help her respond because, yeah, there are Social Security publications right on point for that. It's a little complicated to interpret them, so I have kind of written that interpretation for employees over the years. So yeah, I'll work with her to get you something on that.
And just to follow up on that, I think it's come up in our budget process too, in terms of what the cost is to do it one way or the other way. So that might...
It's come up for a couple of reasons. One, sometimes when we've looked at structural organizations of our joint departments between city and county, and the city employees are on Social Security and we're not, and how would that affect them if they became county employees or vice versa. And also, I think there's a proposal through CCI to allow counties that are currently under the Social Security system to change their minds and go onto a defined benefit plan. And CCI is trying to take that forward to NACO at the national level. We realize it'd be a national change,
Yeah.
but there is some information out there, and it's been hard for me to gauge whether it's a good proposal for CCI to be fighting for at the national level or not. So it'd be very helpful.
Okay.
Any other questions, Tom? Thanks, Tom.
I'll make a motion, resolution of the Board of County Commissioners, Pickens County, Colorado, approving the amendment and reinstatement of the Pickens County Public Employee Retirement Plan.
Second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, Tom. Next, we're on to our consent public hearings. These are our second readings. First is a resolution authorizing the Pickens County Emergency Management Department to submit a grant application to the State of Colorado Emergency Management Performance Grant for the purpose of funding a portion of the Pickens County Emergency Management Annual Budget. And Valerie McDonald is here. Do you have any questions? We went through this at first reading fairly well, but anybody have any questions? This is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to make any comments on this? I'll keep the public hearing open for the next item as well.
George, would you accept a motion, and we can let Valerie get back to her emergency managing? I would move to approve the resolution authorizing Pickens County's Emergency Management Department to submit a grant application to the State of Colorado Emergency Management Performance Grant for the purpose of funding a portion of Pickens County's Emergency Management Annual Budget.
Second.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Valerie. Okay, next is an ordinance establishing licensing procedure and criteria for retail marijuana and designation of county official responsible for processing applications. And Don Ely's here. If you have any questions on this, we went through this fairly well in depth on first reading. Anybody have any questions? This is a public hearing. Anybody wish to make any comments on this? Yes, if you just state your name.
My name is Jackie Brownhart, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time for me to be saying what I came to say or not. I understand, is today the day that you are voting whether you want to have the 4 different places of marijuana in the county, the retail shops and the retail? Is today the day you're voting on that?
No, today is just a day where we're just going to designate a person to accept applications.
Okay.
And we're going to have a series of work sessions over the next month or so to talk about implementing rules and regulations.
Okay, all right, well, thank you, and I'm kind of misunderstood.
Okay, you're fine. Anybody else wish to make a comment on this? Yes, sir. Can you just identify yourself, please?
Yeah, my name's Eric Oliphant, and I'm involved with visual arts and philosophy. And my comment is sort of like the next stage after all these establishments get going to sell marijuana. What I'm concerned about is, what are these people going to do with the marijuana when they get it? Right now, the medical marijuana people have to stay in their houses, out of public sight, if they indulge in that. And, I can envision people walking around the streets of Aspen and people, the tourists who don't endorse this, getting really uptight about it. And the tourist business is a big part of what everybody does here. And I wouldn't want anything to, disturb people like that. So there should be some consideration to this about what the people are going to do. Are they going to go inside some place, like maybe this new art museum? There'd be some designated area. I say the art museum because a lot of what has come out of results of all this marijuana is, in my point of view, there's art. There are different regions. You can take the whole chaos, but you can section it, and there are super real realities. There's abstract art and non-objective art too, which lies in the realm of that. And that's why the museum could set some sort of standard about that. And then from there's a lot of other things that could be done.
Again, not to interrupt you, but just what I mentioned to the lady behind you, what's on our table today is just establishing a procedure and criteria for a county official responsible. I think what you're wanting to discuss, and we're happy to have your input, is when we start talking about rules and regulations.
Okay.
But that's not what we're discussing today.
That's going to be considered later?
Yes, that's correct.
George?
Yes.
If I can add on briefly, and perhaps your comments at some level are well directed to the city of Aspen as well, who would have jurisdiction over the art museum and areas like that, as well as commenting for our proposals. But I wanted to mention that the state law prohibits public consumption. And so there is no public consumption allowed under state law, let alone what we do.
Thank you, Bill. And then if you want to make some other public comments regarding this or any other topic, again, at our regular public meetings such as today, you're welcome to make comments, public comments as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments regarding this particular ordinance? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment and bring it back to the board.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution for an ordinance, to approve the ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County, Colorado, establishing Pickens County retail marijuana licensing regulation and designating a county official responsible for processing applications concerning retail marijuana.
Second.
Rob?
Yeah, just a quick comment that was stated to make this clear for the public last time in our first reading, is that the second portion of this is really the rules and regulations regarding these things. And in effect, because we are not tackling the rules and regulations at this time, this is in effect a ban on this happening, because it can't happen until the rules and regulations are written. It's not our intention that I don't think that it be a ban forever. It's a ban that we have time and information to study exactly what's appropriate regarding our local jurisdictions' duty and responsibility to set the guidelines for the retail shops and the grow operations of marijuana, of recreational marijuana.
Rachel, Michael?
Yeah, Rob, I don't think that's quite accurate, in that the state will not be issuing any licenses for anyone until January. And so if we have rules and regulations in place by January, applications would be reviewed under the rules and regulations if we should have them adopted by January. So we're not enacting a ban, and that it's just not possible to obtain a license from us or the state until, at this point, after January 1st.
And I guess what I was just saying is, if we don't enact the rules and regulations before January, a license cannot be issued here.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
That's what I was
I know.
defining as.
Okay. I
It's an
just-
incomplete guideline for licensing, which does not allow licensing until we finish it.
Yes, we can accept licenses, but, applications, but we would not be able to review them because there's no criteria yet.
Correct.
And nothing could be issued.
That's what I was
But again, I
trying
just
to
wanted to
clear.
clarify, it's not a ban, technically. It may have that type of effect, but again, no one can get a license from the state until after January anyhow. But this is so that there won't be, that as the state receives applications, we will at least know what's in the wings for our community and what has been submitted.
Michael?
Yeah, and I don't think that it's going to take us very long to do these regulations. I don't think it's that complicated. There's some areas of the county that don't want to have anything to do with it whatsoever. There are other areas of the county that are more laissez-faire, but I think, you know, as was pointed out in our last session, that 75% of Pickens County voted for this amendment. So I think it's incumbent upon us to get it done and get it done by January.
I'm going to echo a few things here. I agree with Rachel that this is really not a ban, this ordinance before us, but it does set the stage for moving forward. It sets the foundation. And I received an update, I think I forwarded on to the commissioners, dated September 13th, in terms of the current status in Colorado regarding recreational marijuana, which counties are allowing it and which are not. And so there's 64 counties in Colorado, and as of September 13th, 42 counties have said they are not going to allow any recreational marijuana, and within some of those 42, there's 9 that have put forth a temporary ban, just to get a better idea how this is all going to play out in the next year. Only 6 counties to date, as of 9/13, have said they are going to allow retail marijuana. So regardless of the vote, because the Amendment 64 passed by a majority in the state of Colorado, right now the vast majority of counties have decided not to allow recreational marijuana in their counties. And I'm sure that they are also reflecting the wishes of their citizens when they make those made those decisions. So even though we have a high percentage here that voted for Amendment 64, again, as I stated earlier, I think there's probably different reasons why people voted for that. And it may not be that they wanted to see cultivation farms next to their properties or retail shops, but they understand that marijuana should be decriminalized. So I will leave that at that, and we'll continue to try to get updates through CCI in terms of what the other counties are going to do. Right now, there's a handful that are still, about 11 that are still pending. Steve?
I agree with statements that all of you have made here. And as we move forward in establishing our rules and regulations for the retail marijuana industry, I think we should all keep in mind that this is an opportunity for Pitkin County to come up with really good model regulations that can be copied by other counties in the state. And also there's a responsibility for us to do this right and to not blow it, because you know, this is new territory we're all getting into, and the federal government has already said if we don't do it right in Colorado, that they retain the authority to step in and shut down the marijuana operations here. So it's really incumbent upon us to come up with something really good that everybody can abide by, that are reasonable laws and regulations.
Okay, do we have a motion on this?
I have a motion and a second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. All right, we're on to our confirmatory reading. This is an emergency resolution accepting grant offers for the Federal Aviation Administration and the Colorado Division of Aeronautics and authorization to spend the funds at the Aspen-Pickett County Airport for the 2013 Capital Improvement Program. And do we have someone here from the airport? Are there any questions?
I have no questions.
This is a confirmatory reading. We had a discussion on this during a work session, but it's not a two-reading process.
No, we had an initial reading on the emergency ordinance, which was passed, and then this is the confirmatory reading. And so how it works with the emergency ordinance, when it's brought forward, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but upon passage in the initial reading, the ordinance is in effect, and then it continues in effect with approval on this confirmatory reading.
Okay. Yes.
I thought this was on our agenda last week as a confirmatory reading, or 2 weeks ago.
No,
Is
that
this the
was
second
that was
confirmatory?
No.
That was the initial reading that set the confirmatory reading for this date.
Actually, that was actual adoption.
It was
That was
adopted.
actual adoption.
Because it
so
was
this
an
is
emergency
confirmatory.
ordinance. So we
So
adopted
there's a
it.
3 start? I'm just curious. Is
Just
it-
two. Pursuant to the charter, the board can take action of an emergency nature if the board determines it's necessary for the health, safety, well-being of the citizens or guests of the county. And when that occurs, whatever the board enacts becomes immediately effective. However, to meet the public notice and public hearing requirements of the charter, what the board then does is to set a confirmatory second reading on the matter. If the board simply confirms the earlier action of the enactment, then the emergency legislation continues in effect. So this should only be the second one. I'm not sure what the agendas are, but
You know, we had a confirmatory reading last time on
Right.
offer grant funds for emergency management. Rob, I wonder if that's what you're thinking
Yeah,
of.
right.
Yeah.
Would you accept a motion, George?
Yes.
I would move to approve the emergency resolution accepting grant offers for the Federal Aviation Administration and the Colorado Division of Aeronautics and authorization to spend the funds at the Aspen-Pickett County Airport for the 2013 Capital Improvement Program.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
This is a public hearing. If you come-
It's not listed as
It's
a
not
public
listed as a
hearing.
public hearing.
Well, it's a confirmatory hearing.
Okay.
It is public, correct, John?
yes, public hearing.
Anybody wishing to make a comment on this?
Well, is that going to increase the air traffic in and out of Pickett County, the airport?
No. It's just a question of accepting monies for funding projects, and those projects are,
The purchase of snow removal equipment, the design and construction of runway and taxiway crack, seal, fog, seal projects, and design and construction of taxiway paved shoulders for the design and reconstruction of the aircraft wash and holding pad. So it really does nothing
Election holding, yeah, that's good.
per se.
No more than general maintenance increases our air traffic, or, general upkeep maintains and moves our airport forward.
Yeah, well, I watch those planes land.
okay, thank you. I'll close the public hearing at this point. All right.
Technically, should we re-vote when we reopen public hearing, or does that?
Well, The idea is that you get the public hearing, and it might help you
I know. We just
determine
did-
what you
just
want to do.
I think we're fine.
Okay, we just didn't have it listed on our agenda for public.
Okay, we're on to our land use public hearing. First is the Leslie G. Rudd Living Trust Activity Envelope and Site Plan Review. Let's see, Wolf is going to present.
We think Richard Shaw's joining us. Would you mind putting your screen on?
Can I ask a question? Suzanne, is Richard Shaw the representative?
Richard Shaw is the representative.
And so, has anyone contacted Richard Shaw to let him know that we're,
In the last 30 minutes?
so are we going to go ahead without the representative?
Can we take 5 minutes and see if,
We can take 5 minutes, but I
5 minutes
mean,
call?
it's, just double check and give them a call. But they're noticed that this is on.
he probably saw those marijuana regulations on the agenda first and thought it would take an hour.
So grassroots will take a 5-minute break, and if he doesn't show up, we'll just move forward.
Properties that are involved in this, you can see, you might want to, just for the area, well, for some of this, maybe you want to take the lights down or.
Okay. Whoops, we can't do that.
Did they put the tape back on?
We're not allowed to do that anymore?
Now we turn the envelope off.
Can you turn the other ones on?
But
You can,
How come the other ones don't
Oh, we
work?
just, whatever you
That-
did, just
that
turn
turned
this
off the
up too.
envelope.
Oh, there we go. I guess you're not
Interesting.
allowed to do that anymore.
Maybe that's why. I bet
now
so.
leave those on, you could turn the other ones off.
There you
But
go.
that turned the Elmo off.
Which it cost a
You're kidding.
All right, let's get to
Okay. We'll just
Good to see George.
Where's Guy when you need him?
Just keep moving.
All right. So the two properties we're dealing with here, you can see Highway 82, right in here. Oh, you can't see if I put on this. I guess there's, there we go. So, here we go. Highway 82 on the bottom. Here's Upper River Road here. You're headed towards Aspen Village over about where Rob's sitting, just to get you, so you're heading down valley here. The big barn that sits across from the Aspen Village up in that big meadow is right in here. That's probably the easiest way to orient you. So the two properties we're dealing with, there's one that's between the highway and the river. It's referred to as Parcel C. It is an open space parcel that was created as part of the Aspen Village River Home subdivision. And that includes other lots that continue down, this way along the river. The other is a meets and bounds parcel that's between Upper River Road and the river on this side. It's referred to as Lot 5, but it's a meets and bounds parcel. So this is a developed parcel with a residence and other structures. This is undeveloped, as I said, is basically an irrigated open space parcel
You
associated
can
with
turn the
that
lights off, George.
subdivision.
I'm sorry. We don't have any live ballots in here, so it's okay to turn them off for this presentation.
But
Doesn't work
it
with
didn't,
me.
it didn't, it didn't do it when you said.
that one off.
No, that's fine.
Is that all
So
right?
the stream bank work that's occurring is on these two parcels and basically is in this area. Parcel C actually extends way down. It's a very long, skinny piece that goes between the highway and the river. But the only bank work that occurred, or is occurring, some of both, is in this area. So the background on this is that there's been continual erosion of these banks. Back in 2011, when the bigger flooding came through, it was further eroded. A lot of the trees are getting undercut, and so they wanted to proceed with some work. They got an Army Corps permit, I think it was the end of last year, and then proceeded with the work last spring without taking the step of getting the county's approval. They didn't know at the time that they needed to come in for that additional step. So they've gotten the clearance from the Army Corps and the Division of Wildlife, but not from the county. So when we saw the work occurring, they stopped the work and have come into the process to correct that. Most of the work, I think, is complete at this point. There's a little bit of additional bank work and then the revegetation of the area that needs to be completed. Just a couple more things I'll put up here to orient you. Again, this just shows it in plan form. Bring that out a little bit. Again, here's the river. the two properties. Here's the house, so you can see basically work has been done along this bank and then along the bank on this side as well. And then just, I think the best set of photos I had in the application to sort of give you a before and after shot. Sorry, let me do. I don't know how well that reads up there, but again, you can see the house here, the bank. This is pre-construction. Kind of gets pretty blacked out. You can't really see the eroded bank there. And then basically they came in here and they worked with the bank. They didn't do any regrading of the banks. They did boulder placement to stabilize the banks. They did some additional other types of structures, and I'll let Richard and his group speak to the specific structures that were built. But basically just to stabilize the bank. And again, on both sides of the river, both banks, they've done some of this work. It's a total of 650 linear feet between both sides of the river. And let's see. In terms of review of this under the code, basically there are exceptions in the floodplain and stream setback provisions of the code that allow for work to occur as long as it's demonstrated that in this case, there is a level of degradation that was necessarily needed to be fixed, and that the work that has been done is intended to restore that bank and bring it back so it improves the riparian habitat and does not impact the functioning of the river as it goes through this property. The applicants provided a number of reports to that effect in addition to their original Army Corps permit application, which obviously was approved. They have a report from a hydrologic engineer who confirmed that these banks were degraded and that work needed to be done to stabilize them. And basically, in this case, on the side where the house is located, the prior work that had been done when the house was built and there had been work done to stabilize the banks had failed over time. And the fact that in this case there was, they brought some of the lawn down to the edge. Again, they impacted the riparian habitat through this stretch. So by repairing the bank and then bringing back wetland vegetation there, they'll actually improve that riparian habitat along the bank and improve the strength of the bank into the future. So, so they had their hydrologic engineer, and then Jonathan Lowski, a wildlife biologist, also looked at this from the riparian habitat perspective, and both confirmed that they felt that that these improvements were necessary and desirable to maintain the bank, and also to maintain, I think I mentioned, the trees that are getting undercut. By doing this, they're actually able to stabilize and keep those trees on the bank, so they also obviously help then to stabilize those banks, and that helps with the habitat. So given that, staff has recommended approval of this, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So, Suzanne, when you started your presentation, you said that the majority of this work had already been done prior to the county being aware of it. And so had the county, had the applicant gone through the normal process, what would that have entailed for your department, and would you have raised any other issues or questions?
No, it would have entailed exactly this process. This would be the same process they would have gone through before, and the same standards apply in terms of what the need for the repair. In this case, what is the impact on the river? I think in this case, what they've done is very much consistent with what we would allow. That I don't think we're looking at it differently because some of it's already there. It's clearly, I mean, in this case, they were really just repairing those banks and trying to minimize the continual erosion of the banks. So again, I think the process is the same. This will require the permits that the county would then would have required. The steps are a little bit off, but essentially they will be completing all of the same steps that they would have otherwise.
All right, thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, Suzanne, thank you for the presentation. Based on the pictures in the packet and your comments that some of the lawn area will be restored to native vegetation and riparian habitat, how far from that top of bank that is currently a form of grass will be restored?
Maybe Richard can help in terms of that. It's the area, it's basically just along the bank. It's not extending farther back, I think, if that's your
Well,
question.
I'm kind of wondering, is it 1 foot worth of native vegetation? Is it 3 feet? Is it 10 feet?
Well, the condition of the
Richard,
bank.
if you just want to identify yourself for the record.
Thank you very much. I'm Richard Shaw, representing Leslie Rudd Living Trust, who is the owner of the property. The embankment is about a 3-to-1 embankment. So the slope comes up from the river's high water mark to a flat terrace plateau. The area from the high water up past the bank to the turn of the bank is the area that's proposed for the revegetation and the restoration of the riparian. That extends, it's variable, but it extends about 30 feet from the edge of the river back.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Suzanne? Michael?
Suzanne, what are the requirements other than riparian habitat? Do you have any other criteria for revegetation?
Oh, for the revegetation?
Yeah, I mean, what standards does that have to meet?
Well, I don't know if there's specific standards. I mean, our primary standards is always native vegetation, and obviously in this case, specific riparian plants. So when the permit comes through and it's reviewed by Susan Pearson, that's what she's looking for in terms of the actual, what plants are going in and, you know, that piece of it. You know, in this case, it's a pretty, I think, fairly straightforward revegetation, and along with the types of riparian plants that would have or should have been in this area but have gone away because of the erosion.
Okay, so we have in both pictures here, we have a bank that's essentially cobble placed there by man, I assume, right? So how do native plants restore themselves in a cobble bank?
I think the area to look where you see the bank here, this is part of the restoration area. Richard, maybe you can help me. This remains. Is this an area that's been worked on, or?
Well, what you're seeing in the lower photograph, on the right side of that is the cobble embankment that you would find naturally occurring in the river. As you move that direction to east, then you get into the area where there has been the placement of these deflection boulders, which are the larger boulder areas, and what you see behind the boulders are areas that have no vegetation growing on them and would be the subject of the revegetation. So there are in fact soils that will allow these plants to grow and flourish and become part of the revegetation of the bank area.
So are you saying that the upstream bank of cobble was placed there by nature, not by the owner?
It's a combination of both. A good deal of that cobble was naturally occurring cobble in the river, and then previous owners and other stabilization efforts in the past, some of it 30 years old, included some of the placement of those cobbles. And while you haven't asked this, there were also a number of native logs that were actually cabled into the slope that were placed 25 or 30 years ago as a way of stabilizing the bank, which have subsequently rotted, and so those no longer serve a purpose. And what is proposed here and what has been constructed is a combination of the placement of cobble, deflection boulders, and the reestablishment with these natural timbers and buried, so that they actually allow for the revegetation to take place very close to the river. Those combination of elements make up the stabilization program.
Suzanne, is there a picture of the proposed restoration, say in 10 years or 20 years?
We don't have a simulation, anything like that. I mean, we just have it in plan form.
Does the applicant have that? Do they have a projection of what it will look like?
We have a revegetation plan, but we don't have a visualization of what that would look like. What I can do is describe the plants, which include woods rose, the service berries that exist there, a series of naturally occurring sedges that are compatible on both sides of the river, there are cottonwoods, and there are willows. And they make up the habitats that are identical to what exists there.
That's all for now.
Just to follow up on Michael's comment, because I don't know enough about this, but I'm wondering if there was soil placed across some of the cobble, would there be possibilities for plants to really take root there and literally stabilize the cobble as well?
There are revegetation methods that can occur at the fringe of the cobble. Willows in particular are the plant that would succeed there. That's actually not where the revegetation needs to occur. There's never been vegetation in the cobble, primarily because the soils aren't rich enough and the water moves it enough and the high water affects it. So it's actually the area above the white line that the revegetation is most effective and needed.
Thank you.
Steve?
This kind of reminds me of a project that happened down near Carbondale where a landowner got in the stream bed and they kind of channelized the Roaring Fork River, and it led to increased unintended consequences of increased erosion on the opposite bank a little farther down, and ended up in a lawsuit between landowners there. And this kind of resembles that. It's the work that was already done, in effect, is channelizing the Roaring Fork, which would increase the velocity of it and in the channel and not allowing it to spread out so much. And other sites on the Roaring Fork, they have put in rocks in the river in kind of a upstream V formation, which quiets the water along the banks and makes the main flow of the water go right down the middle. And it seems to me that could have been a better solution here, to just quiet the water by the edge by placing a series of stones out in the river and facing a V facing upstream. And I'm just wondering if that was looked at by a hydrologist or whoever it was who was designing the work on this. How did they arrive at doing this as the solution as opposed to the other possible solution?
There are two hydrologists that have been involved in the project. Water resource consultants originally developed a plan to stabilize the riverbank. They determined that the high water flow was the major force eroding the embankment, and their recommendation was what's described as deflection boulders, and those are the ones that you see placed there. That has the effect of quieting the water at the edges, reducing the force where the erosion is taking place, but does not get into the channel nor vary the channel characteristics downstream. And then Crane has prepared a hydrology report as well, Crane Associates, and what they have described is what are the effects on the river channel, water flow, spreading the channel or not, and the effects that might occur on the down valley portion of the river. And they have identified no effects that would be poor consequences as a result of this project, and really reconfirm this being the appropriate way to go about restoring the embankment, which has had the erosion problem. They further talk a little bit about stabilizing these large mature, predominantly spruce. Some of these are in the 20 to 25 inch dimension. These are big trees that have been undercut. And by placing the boulders underneath these undercut cavities, they're able to secure the trees and create a stable environment at the bank for the trees to continue to grow. This is something that Jonathan Lusky has also identified in his evaluation of the report, suggesting that is a very positive wildlife habitat advantage of approaching the river this way. The other point I would really make is that while this project actually has involved about 650 feet of the river, where you look at it, it's a very spotty placement. In other words, you shouldn't have the visualization that the full 650 feet has been disturbed or even part of the project. In some cases, it's individual boulders placed in areas and then a gap of 50 feet or 70 feet to the next point in which there was any intervention in the river corridor.
So it sounds like we're into your presentation, Richard, which is fine in terms of answering some of these questions. Do you want to add anything, or?
Well, I think through the course of this conversation, we've really tried to illustrate it. We want to identify a couple of things. First, there probably is no better technique to stabilize a condition where you have these erosional forces occurring along a relatively steep bank. They were placed and completed by the owner in a way that was consistent with the Division of Wildlife's recommendation and the letter in response to the 404 permit which was received. The Corps of Engineers likewise had a full review of this project and identified the conditions under which it would occur. The owner has a very serious need. There has been erosion in the past that is extremely significant close to the house, and partly that's because of the steepness of the bank that was previously there. So the solution to both the stabilization of the bank is really using natural materials, things that would have occurred in the river, trying to establish and revegetate with the native plants that would normally have occurred there, pulling back some of the areas of manicured grass which were part of the previous ownerships that came to the bank of the river, and to essentially complete this river project with the least intervention to protect the property and the erosion, which is historically, particularly in 2011, was a kind of horrifying event given how close this came and the rate in which the erosion of the steeper bank was occurring. At this point in time, we would be very desirous of proceeding with the activity envelope and most specifically to revegetate what was disturbed. And it's a full and comprehensive idea for the amount of vegetation, the maturity which would be placed, and pending the ability to do that, we would like to move forward and have this completed and reestablished as soon as practical and complete this project.
Thank you. Questions? Michael, Steve?
So, in a year, Richard, are we going to see a difference of this bank?
Yes, from a vegetation standpoint, the combination of trees and riparian shrubs would make an enormous difference, particularly and the native grasses and sedges that make up the ground cover. This is bare soil today, and that will be green. The roots will have established stabilization to the bank, and it will be fully planted. And actually, as the condition is written in the staff report, having this complete by January 1st would make next spring, this would begin the process of rehealing and reestablishing the vegetation in a very significant way.
So, I mean, I would suggest to the commissioners, we had a restoration project up in Stillwater, and we asked that we visit it in a year and sort of monitor the success of it, because my impression of this, now I'm having trouble visualizing that this is different from, excuse me, I have a little riparian bird calling. That we need to monitor it. I mean, I would hope for success at this, but this property has a long history, as Richard's pointed out, of putting logs in, putting cobble in, putting so forth and so on in, and not being successful. So this is the latest and best scientific approach, but I think we need to monitor it, not only to make sure that that is successful, but to see whether this actually is indeed the best method for restoration, because to a large degree, the erosion is a natural process, and it occurs during high water. The real problem here is, and we've tried to deal with it, is the proximity of the house to the river. That's the problem. So okay, well, we'll leave the house where it is, but let's make sure that the bank is successful, and that we learn something from this project.
Steve?
Suzanne, I wanted to find out about the lawn coming up really close to the river. I remember a case on Capitol Creek where there was a lawn that went right up to the creek, and the caucus had been told that they were going to be required to let that portion of the lawn near the creek go back into riparian habitat. And what are the county rules regarding lawns as, in a yard as it approaches the stream bank?
Well, the rule, if this was, undeveloped, someone coming in to develop, we'd be working under our 100-foot setback. This is obviously a nonconformity with that, so we have some of that existing condition. So I guess, we've looked at it in terms of the improvements they're doing now are going to bring back riparian habitat next to the river. We didn't go beyond that, I guess, in terms of asking them to alter then any of their other existing landscaping on the property near the river.
Okay.
This is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to make any comments on this? Reporters, you don't get to ask a question. Afterwards, you may. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Bring it back to the board. Rachel?
Well, you would have had a hard time telling that to Bill Dunaway.
I would have told Bill that.
But I am going to support this application, and it is unfortunate that you didn't realize that a permit from Pickens County would be needed first for the earth moving, but this seems to be a corrective measure and bring you in compliance. I really would encourage, I don't believe there are grounds to require this in the resolution, but I would encourage you to think about trying to bring some of that soils down across the edge of the cobble and see what you can get established there with willows as well. If the cobble is successful over time, there would be a natural deposition of soils there that would start to allow some vegetation to grow as well. And giving that a little bit of a helping hand might prove to be very valuable to you in future flood control and high water events. And as we're all looking at what's happened on the Front Range, where we look at a 100-year floodplain, but you can easily see a 200-year flood. And so I would strongly encourage you to talk to your experts about that and get some compost and some soils in there that could also be reseeded and start to fill in the cobble. I mean, you look at different areas, and sometimes everything's been washed off the cobble and sometimes not. And sometimes you'll see some really nice recruitment within those areas, and I think you could find value there.
Michael?
Yeah. I really think we need to look at this a little more fully. I think Steve's point of where does the lawn begin and where does the river riparian area begin, and what's been described to me is that it's going to be next to the cobble and it's not going to extend back into the lawn area. But quite frankly, if it's moist, and the willows will grow back there too. So I mean, I personally would like to see a non-disturbance area established that's a certain amount of feet away from the bank, even though it's not going to be 100 feet, and that be part of the approval, and that allows volunteering to occur, and that, quite frankly, that what happens when you get this kind of deposition is it's brought there by the river, if indeed it was all brought there by the river and not a human being, and then it gets taken away by the river. whatever nature puts there, nature can take away. So you really have to be fairly aggressive about this in terms of planting, because it's the disturbance of the turbulence that slows down the erosion. And what Steve's talking about, when you bank a river like this, it actually increases velocity. So the only thing that decreases the velocity is an aggressive planting of willows and of trees and roots and that kind of thing. So as presented, it's interesting, but I don't think it's a full plan here. And I think we should have a setback where there's a non-disturbance after the project's established, and there will be no more lawn to the edge of the cobble. There'll be 20 feet back from that to the porch of the house or something. But otherwise, we're just going to deal with this on a 10-year basis or 12-year basis, depending on what the runoffs are. So I wish this project success, but I think, as outlined, it's more cosmetic than successful. Plus, I think that we need a monitoring of it to make sure that whatever plan is put in place is successful, and we learn something from it, because we're going to be, this is the second or third water edge project that we've had, and the last project, which was the historical house downstream from this, we decided, well, we're not going to have lawn within a certain distance of the river, because that's antithetical to riparian habitat. So I think we need to be more forceful about this and have a non-disturbance area, have a requirement to come back and show us this, and have it last up to 5 to 10 years. Those are my feelings on it.
So just to understand or clarify, Michael, or maybe Rich could help out as well. We've got the work as you've shown in terms of the bank restoration, and then you're talking about upstream.
Up the bank, in other words. If you look at the top picture, we have lawn coming down to the cobble. I would like a setback, whatever is appropriate, 20, 30 feet, where there is no more cultivation of lawn, where it's essentially allowed to go back to on its own. The client doesn't have to do anything. It'll happen on its own.
And then along what stretch? The entire property?
Along the stretch of the entire property.
No, I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah, because that's threatened. I mean, if you stabilize one area, oftentimes you simply just endanger another area. You know, water's relentless.
So then the question would be, what would be a realistic setback or protection area? Is it 20 feet? Is it 30? Is it 10? I don't know, maybe staff can pipe in, or for Richard.
So, if I may comment, I think this is a condition where the natural topography of the river terrace sets a very clear boundary between the flat areas and the steep areas of the bank. The steep areas of the bank are those areas that are affected by any kind of current or flow. And maybe the way to treat this would be to say from the top of the bank to the high water mark of the river would be left in a natural condition, and it varies, but I would tell you frankly it's about 20 feet generally, but it varies from 15 feet to probably slightly more than that, up to 30 feet. But use the top of the bank as the measure in which a setback for the natural riparian would be established. And in that area, from top of bank to river, that we focus on including a restoration plan predominantly of willows and other naturally occurring plants in that habitat type of this section of the river, and that there be no cultivated landscape or urban landscape, if you will, in that zone.
Well, the reason I want it set up into the lawn is because you have cottonwoods and you have spruce, and those will volunteer over time to populate that area. And if you're allowed to have a lawn, you simply won't have any trees up above. When you have those trees up above, those roots extend essentially right down into the water. And that's why it's important. And the consequences of that is that in time, the view of the river will be obscured from the house because you have trees up there. And Cottonwoods will send out volunteers every year. And if it's a lawn, they simply won't succeed. And you get cottonwoods that look successful, but you don't have a successful colony of cottonwoods because you have no young trees replacing it. So although Richard's idea is good, it simply, literally doesn't go far enough and should be set back onto the bank to allow whatever growth is going to occur there to occur naturally.
Rachel?
I kind of thought I heard you both saying the same thing, maybe in different language, Michael, because he had said from the top of the bank back 20 feet. And I think that would be reasonable.
If that's what he said.
Yeah.
I think
Actually, I didn't say that.
that's what I thought.
Okay, but because I thought you said roughly 20 feet.
Yeah, the area of the embankment, which goes from the high water mark of the river to the top of the bank, and then it flattens out into the river terrace. I was suggesting that from the high water mark to a point identified as top of bank would be the area of non-cultivated landscape, which would mean the owner would remove a portion of that landscape today and restore it with the riparian vegetation, which will include the trees that Michael suggested, as well as the willows and the other species of plant materials that I had identified.
And are you talking about the 100-year high water mark?
Well, it's what's classically defined in the county as the high water mark, typically where the water gets on in the middle of June when the runoff is occurring.
My understanding from the non-consumptive work that's been done for the Colorado River Basin, you really don't get recruitment of willows unless there is overtopping of the bank and real, coming over and over, as opposed to, I understand, it's just, that's been the standard that they're using with the CWCB and others for defining non-consumptive needs of healthy river systems. So I guess I was understanding that it would be close to 20 feet from the top of the cobble would be allowed to go into native and re-vegged and then left undisturbed. But we can't leave a bare ground like below where it's just going to be a recruitment area for thistle. It has to be re-vegged first and then allowed to be undisturbed going forward.
So what I think I hear Michael and you saying is that we want about 20 feet from the top of the bank. And what Richard is saying is you're just using the bank and the high water mark, but not going back along that bench. So there's a little difference. I'm just trying to clarify what I
Yeah. The other physical fact of this existing property was that there are areas in which there are terraces, for example, which are in that category. I mean, the house is actually placed very close to the river. So these improvements, which have been part of the house for a long time, would actually be part of the setback that was just discussed if it goes 20 feet from the face of the bank. So I'm just suggesting there's some real physical limitations to this existing improvement that would not make that practical.
And that's part of the problem dealing with a non-conforming piece of property and just having to work with what's there.
Is it possible we go back to the picture that was the aerial looking down on the site? And I don't know to what extent you could enlarge that just down to the...
With focus or not?
That's what we got. But, I mean, essentially, you're looking at the house here. There's another structure over here, and what Richard's talking about, some of the hardscape improvements are right in here. And I don't remember enough specifically
Yeah.
about, in terms of lawn areas beyond that. Um,
My suggestion would be that from the high water mark, you have a 20-foot setback in, and that's undisturbed. That's aside from the, and, if, I'm not talking about growing grass in the living room, I'm talking about avoiding that. But essentially, this property is at jeopardy the entire length, losing the property. And I think trying to restore it to, as we did just downstream, trying to restore it to a more natural environment, the county and actually the applicant would be better served, aside from the work that they're proposing.
Okay. Are you suggesting that if any hardscape is in the 20 feet now, that it be removed as part of this, Michael, or that perhaps you'll let time
Well,
work
it
its
depends. I
way
don't know
on
what
that?
they mean by hardscape.
Patio?
There's patio areas,
We can avoid those things, fine, go out on the patio. But and this is the length of the property. There's not a patio the length of the property, is there?
no, the hardscape.
Then we can go,
It's
then we
right here.
can avoid we won't have to adjust the hardscape, but let's go and put a 20-foot setback from the high water mark that's going to be natural and undisturbed, won't be lawn any longer, period. And that the property will then be armored at the river level and at the higher level with trees that volunteer naturally, and you have a more natural riparian landscape. That's the goal of the county. The applicant has a partial goal, but I don't think they've gone far enough.
Richard, using that suggestion, going back from the high water mark 20 feet setback, not counting any hard structures, hard improvements, does that impair the property in any other way?
There are a couple of structures that are part of the irrigation systems for the ranch that fit into that category. So I think if we could define existing hardscape and existing structures as of this date, would not be affected by the 20-foot setback from high water, that we could solve the problem associated with the residents, and we could establish an effective revegetation plan in that zone.
Is this one?
Reasonable?
That one of the structures here?
Yeah.
Here, I can put this up. But this is.
One of the advantages of having, if the applicant had come before the county first, is they may have given us an opportunity to have done a site visit and had a better understanding. And then I like Michael's suggestion in terms of a follow-up, because it's not only to see that the applicant is following the decision, but it could be a model for other properties that may need some work as well. And we've done that, as Michael said, up on North Star, where we had quite a restoration project, came back a year later and saw that it was actually very effective, and it was accomplishing the goals that were originally stated.
I just put this up to show you. This is one of those structures that Richard's talking about. You can see it up here a little better.
But imagine that bank covered with willows. That's what we're trying, and not grass. That's what we're trying to achieve.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm looking at that same picture here, and that's the area where they had the logs cabled to the bank to try to protect the lawn there, obviously. Then the logs were removed. In the lower picture, it actually looks like a boat launch, to me, is the appearance of it.
I think the photograph, because of the heavy shadow, gives you that appearance, but
And maybe, I think that it looks like they probably pushed some cobble up on there for part of that. But I think that 20-foot setback, and even between the top of the bank and that pump house for the irrigation system, if that wasn't mowed, we would start getting some willows, or some wetland plants would be growing in there just naturally if it was not mowed anymore. You wouldn't necessarily even have to plant anything there, because nature very quickly would determine this is a riparian area and that is actually a wetland because it has cottonwoods growing there. And nature would reclaim it if it just wasn't mowed anymore in that stretch. And I would not at all suggest to remove the pump house, because it was put there because the well was there obviously to pump water for the irrigation system. But I agree with Michael that if we let nature take its course in terms of helping to repair the bank, and there are places on our land on Capitol Creek that used to be underwater and now it's dry ground with alders and willows and things growing there. It still is a riparian area, but nature has a way of taking care of things. And I like your suggestion, Rachel, to try to put some dirt down and get some things growing down onto the cobble. The river has the final say in this matter.
Yeah.
Even the big rocks that have been placed there very carefully by a track hoe, or they might, next high water, they might all be gone downstream somewhere, because the water is so powerful. And I've seen rocks that big get shifted around by rivers. And all the cobble that was pushed up against the bank might all be out in the middle of the river after the next high water also. And I'd love to have a site visit in a year or two just to see what the effect of the work that's been done. And it just goes to show that, when people have tried to fix this or to improve, quote unquote, the river and the bank and things in the past, and those kind of efforts always seem to fail in the long run, because water is so powerful, and all we have to do is look and all the canyons over by Boulder and Estes Park to see what a well-built road with all sorts of big rocks and things protecting it, and it's gone from one storm event like that. So I would support, I can only support this application if that there is a requirement to, pull back a little bit from the stream into that lawn area and let it go back into riparian vegetation.
Rob?
Yeah, I understand the need to have a untouched restoration area to rehabilitate the riverbank naturally. But I don't know, what I would suggest is, and I'm looking at this Rudd Residence Riverbank Activity Envelope map, and that might be a good one to put up just for the public to see. I would suggest that 20 feet may be appropriate in some places, and 30 feet may be appropriate in some places, and 10 feet may be appropriate in some places. And it's really hard to see from these pictures in the various sections of the photographs that we've seen exactly what is appropriate in various places. And I don't know if the applicant should come back with a proposal as to, given the information that he's heard from the various commissioners, as to what that setback should be in various places. I mean, here you can see the high water line, which kind of cuts through here, I'm assuming. And then these slashed areas is the 100-year flood zone, which really comes up to the edge of the house. And it's hard to tell what the topography is there in terms of the slope. in terms of the vegetation that's already there, in terms of, 10-foot boulders versus cobble that could be washed away in a flood scenario. But to put just a 20-foot number on it may not necessarily be appropriate everywhere, and it may be a larger number in some places and a lesser number in some places. But it's hard from the materials that I've looked through in this application, hearing what the commissioners are saying. I understand the goal of restoring this bank, and it's done, I think, in large part by the boulders and the stuff that was done already. But I think the advice that I'm hearing from the other commissioners is that there could be more done in a natural sense long-term by allowing a larger barrier to the river to grow back naturally without it being manicured on as lawns or whatnot. But it's hard for me to say 20 feet is the number. And I would rather get a more, have design workshop who does a lot of great work along these lines, have them come back with a more comprehensive proposal as to, there's a big bank here, so we really only need to go back 5 or 10 feet here, and then here it's a more gradual slope, so 20 feet of natural vegetation is more appropriate along this stretch of the riverbank. I'm not an expert in this sort of design at all, so I don't know. That would be my recommendation, is to have more thought put into it.
My response was that in thinking about the top of the bank as the setback, that what you have just described is in fact the way to do it, using natural topographic features. Because there are steep parts of the bank where the elevation change is quite radical against the bank, but the vertical distance from high water is only 10 feet. And then there are other areas that has maintained landscape now that is back 20 feet in an area where the bank is very gradual. So in thinking about a physical barrier that is a fixed setback, it doesn't take into consideration what we know, which is the topography in the top of the bank is really the condition that establishes where riparian would occur naturally. As you get higher, you're not going to be in riparian habitat zones. It's going to be much drier and it's going to look more like sagebrush. When you get down into this area, as the bank starts to slope away, that's where the riparian would occur naturally. And as a consequence, while I understand what you're describing, it seems to me a better way to do that is to establish it on the basis of the geographic features of the top of the bank.
And
So, I'm sorry.
and I get that, but maybe it's the top, a foot, 2 feet back from the top of the bank. Because there's another picture here which hasn't yet been put up, which, actually that's not the one, that shows that in some areas there's 2 banks, there's 2 tiers of banks. And the lawn actually goes kind of over the top of that bank, that upper bank. So should it be groomed to the edge of that bank, or should it be groomed a foot back from the edge of that bank to allow some sort of brush stabilizer for that bank? Again, I'm not a landscape architect, but to me, you have a large flood type occurrence, and a lawn isn't going to hold that bank together, but a root system, and again, I'm not a landscape architect, so I don't know, but I would think if you had some sort of brush between the edge of that bank a foot back or 2 feet back, stabilizing that whole bank structure, that would make sense, as opposed to having a lawn that goes right to or over the edge of that bank. And I'm going to find that photo.
Is this the one with?
Yes. And it very clearly shows that there are 2 levels of banks here. There's this bank, and then there's this bank. And I don't know how that corresponds to that activity envelope. But again, I'm looking through this packet and I don't really know what the right answer is because the line hasn't been drawn on that activity envelope as to remain natural and allow for, grooming or I don't know what the...
Lawn.
Yeah, lawn care.
I'm sensitive we're getting pretty close to be able to provide some direction. Michael?
Yeah, I mean, we had this talk before, which was when we set our 100-foot setback, there was arguments about very steep banks rising into different areas that might not be called riparian, but they were very proximate to the river. And there was long discussion about it. And the thought was, well, it's very hard for us to just really make those distinctions in a regulation. So we're just going to set a 100-foot horizontal setback. Doesn't matter what the elevation is. And I understand you wanted to be sensitive to this issue, and there might be more appropriate places. But the difficulty, of course, is that it would take much more study to do this, and the ultimate landscape architect is nature, and nature will take care of that 20-foot setback. It'll just occupy it. You just can't have a lawn near a stream bed because you need what you described as a root system stabilizing the stream bed. Plus you need actual plant structure in the stream because that small amount of turbulence that willow creates, and then you multiply it by hundreds and then thousands of willow stems, that actually slows down the stream a huge amount, more than any boulder will ever do, one boulder. So, yes, indeed, it's slightly arbitrary, but from the high water mark is a curving line, and that 20-foot setback will curve in concurrence with that high water mark. I think that's the best we can come up now. I think it's sufficient to what our needs are and what the river's needs are.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. So if we can add language and however best to word that we're going to using the high water mark and going back from the bench 20 feet setback, utilizing natural topographic features as well to provide that as a natural environment, excluding the existing hardscapes and existing structures.
Can I just clarify?
Yes.
20 feet beyond the high water mark or 20 feet beyond the top of bank? Because we've got high water mark, top of bank, and my understanding was we were talking 20 feet beyond that top of bank.
That's what I'm understanding, is 20 feet beyond the bank, and using the natural topographical features, so it allows a little movement in there, but excluding those existing structures and hardscapes.
And it's already requiring revegetation for the disturbed areas so far.
Right, this would...
that they've disturbed during this current work. It's already required.
We would, basically the way I would put it is we'll amend the envelope to extend, and then, right, their revegetation plan, or what, then that would be included within this restoration area, and with language to...
The ultimate goal, obviously, of the owner is he wants to protect his property from being flooded, eroded away. And so I think we're enhancing his property by these conditions in the long run.
George?
Yeah.
I think you've captured it. The other one element we talked about was some sort of monitoring or a 2-year visit. I would suggest 2 years, just so we have a chance to see what's growing back and things like that, as opposed to 1 year. And then I would say that I am open to revisiting this at that 2-year point, should the applicant want to come in and say, this is a hardship that has occurred using this 20-year foot line. We need 3 feet around the house where there's not trees or pine trees growing into the windows, or something like that, where we can get a little more site specific. And so, I see us moving forward with this now. so that you can get planted this year before the frost starts, and you can get that work done. I don't want to have to table this to another meeting. But I think, again, I would say, at least for myself, I'm open to revisiting it if you can come back and say, hey, in this area, because of the topography, because of these things, can we still have this little belt of green, based on the specifics of the site. So that's just a comment for future reference. But I'd like to move this forward today as well.
Is that just a staff visit, or were you looking for something broader than that?
I'd like to see a successful project, what it looks like in 2 years. So I'd
you'd
just like to
a
go along
BOCC
with staff.
visit. Okay.
So,
I'm just to clarify, Rachel, because my concern is just what you're talking about. It looks to me on this map like that 20 feet from the top of the bank now, not the high water line, is really going to be about a 30-foot section of the house, which means you can have no walking access on that side because a path is non-natural.
Well,
Bob,
that's why I said I'd like to let them come back with a more specific. If they want to say, we need this space around the edge of the envelope, we can modify what we're doing today, we can revisit it, but let's move it forward today rather than have to table for a site visit now and for all those sort of elements. I think there's a chance to make sure we do good, because it's not requiring them to tear anything out now, it's just requiring them to start allowing it to go back into native vegetation, and I think we'd have a chance to see that.
I guess I'm asking for clarification as to exactly what allowing it to go back to native vegetation means. Not walking on it, not cutting it, not...
I think it means not cutting it, for the most part. But again, I think unless the applicant wants us to table it today.
I'm just saying a legal document that we put in as a resolution needs to have clarification as to what we're asking for when we say non-touched, or whatever the terminology that you just said.
Undisturbed
what is
area.
That undisturbed area? Is there a definition in our code as to what an undisturbed area means?
well,
I'm asking the question.
I could define it as a non-mowed area. I mean, you can have access to the entire area, you can go whatever you want, but you're simply not going to mow it and maintain a lawn. So,
Yeah, it's not a maintained landscape.
yeah, it's not a maintained landscape. It's allowed to revert to its natural state, whatever that happens to
So
be.
no mowing, no cutting branches,
No grazing.
grazing.
No, I don't think it means no cutting branches. I mean, in terms of routine maintenance of a lawn, I think we're kind of overthinking this a little bit, Rob. Myself and...
If I were an applicant, I'd want to know, if it were my
Well,
house.
if I was an applicant, I would come in before I started the work.
Why don't we just ask the applicant then, instead of second guessing? Richard, is this all right with you?
In terms of what is the landscape, is it undisturbed, natural, unmaintained? I would suggest that what you're really targeting is turf grasses. And there has to be some maintenance anyway. We will have a weed patch that is remarkable in the county if we don't do some maintenance. We don't want that, and I don't think that's what the commission would want either. So what I would target it is there would not be a maintained turf grass landscape zone. And I guess in hearing the conversation, I think two ideas got blended, and it ended up talking about a much bigger area than we were first talking about. We were describing high water to the top of the bank, which was the proposal that I had suggested. And then we talked about a setback that was 20 feet. And we put from the top of the bank, and then we added 20 feet from the top of the bank. So you have effectively talked about a zone that goes well into the house in this particular existing property. And I would hope you could reconsider that we would have no turf grass, but we would establish a 20-foot setback from high water mark instead of from the top of the bank as these two ideas sort of merged.
Okay, so, board, does that work for you?
I'm fine with high water mark 20 feet back. I just want to create a margin that is not, essentially having no margins on this river caused and was a contributor to this erosion. So we need to, aside from the immediate needs of placing boulders and revetments and whatever on the actual bank, we need to have an area of non-disturbance. Weed control can be allowed in that area.
Okay, so let's revisit this. 20-foot
So back to what you
setback.
said originally, which wasn't what I thought everyone had said before that, so. So you're saying 20 feet beyond the high water line, and I guess.
From the high water line.
Right.
From the
And
On
so I
a
guess
horizontal measurement, 20 feet back.
So one question for you would be if that top of bank that we're looking at, where you're seeing grass coming over the edge, if that's 25 feet, do you want that setback to extend farther based on that?
20
What is the
feet
high
from the
water
high
mark?
water mark.
Okay.
And I think it's maybe not perfect, and it doesn't cover every case here, but it's a start, and we'll learn something from it. And I think the owners will learn something from it, too.
And then we can just add that language that Richard had included in terms of excluding any maintained turf grass zone, however you had worded that, Richard. Okay, good? Anyone want to make a motion to that effect?
I will make a motion to that effect.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Approving the Leslie G. Rudd Living Trust Activity Envelope Site Plan Review as amended.
Yes.
Okay,
Second.
and I think I opened and closed public comment, didn't I? It was a while ago.
Yes.
Okay, good. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Good, thank you, Richard. Good
Thank you,
discussion.
Commissioner. Thank you.
Board, want to take a
5 minutes before we go on the next one?
10-minute break? Site plan review for river restoration and bank stabilization. Mike Kramer will present, and I hope our applicants had the opportunity to sit in on our last conversation regarding river restoration and perhaps picked up a few points and could expect some of the direction we'll be going in.
Been here before, too.
Mike?
Okay, thank you. The request is for an activity envelope and site plan review for river restoration and bank stabilization. The applicant, we actually have 3 separate entities and they're all under one ownership. And I'll read them off here for the record. PT Ranch Barn LLC, PT Ranch House LLC, 1892 Castle Creek LLC, and we also have a 4th property, which is the Ravelson property. Bob's here with us, and Gabby. They have consented to the processing of this application, and this is part of the proposal from the applicants. We've got Glenn next to me here, representing the PT Ranch Properties, and also Mike Claffey with Ecological Consulting, who's also done the 2 other river restoration projects we've seen in the county, one at the Ed Bass property east of town at North Star, and then one on Warren Creek. There's 4 properties that are implicated in this proposal, and I'll quickly go through what they are. Right here, I'm going to outline the PT Ranch House LLC property. To the south of that is actually another piece, this larger one right here, and that's the PT Ranch Barn LLC property. So 2 separate parcels, one with a house here and one with a house here. 1892 Castle Creek LLC is also owned in this PT Ranch complex. And then across the river is the Rafelson property. And all these properties are accessed by Castle Creek Road, and we're looking at an area of the county that's about 2 miles south of the roundabout. These four properties are all accessed off of the driveway right here, and the Rafelson property crosses the creek with a bridge. It's on the east side of Castle Creek. 1892 Castle Creek LLC is on the west side, and obviously these 2 properties are on the west side of the creek. And the request is actually twofold, and one was actually requested and talked about a few years ago. 1892 Castle Creek LLC has a 1041 hazard review that was conducted at, I think, in the mid-2000s, and a house was built there. It's outside of the 100-year floodplain. It only had to be required to comply with the 20-foot setback. But this property does flood, And staff has been on this property a few years ago when it did flood in the spring, and it is a danger to the house. There was water almost up to the edge of the house, and the applicants over the years have used sandbags to try and stop the flood water from coming in. But basically, with this turn in the river right here, all that flood water is washing away a bank on this left descending portion of the river, and it's flooding into 1892 Castle Creek. So that's one portion of the application. The applicants want to armor that bank. They use encapsulated soil lifts and natural vegetation to stabilize banks. They'll use rocks and cobble, and we'll let them explain more when necessary to stabilize a bank. Another portion of this is that the Rafelson property right here has a western property line that is bound by Castle Creek. And this portion of the property has an approved and actually was a required pond for fire protection, and that right descending bank is eroding. Staff was on site 2 weeks ago, and it's eroding. It's a hazard to the property. Bob and Gabby are using sandbags and logs right now to stabilize the bank. It's not an ideal situation, and part of the proposal as of today is to reconstruct that bank and then armor the bank so it doesn't keep on threatening the property in that pond. The third portion of this application is up here, a little bit higher on Castle Creek. And you can kind of see right here, if you look closely, right here in the middle is an island. And it's where Castle Creek has actually diverted around this portion of land. And over the years, almost 100% of the water is going on the right side of this island. And what's happening on the left side is it's almost dried up. And staff was on site a couple weeks ago with how much rain and water we've gotten this month and last month. There's just a trickle coming through on this left portion of the braid here. And what the applicants want to do is they want to put in some cobble and a hardened riffle right here. And they want to divert some of that water to the left descending bank, and then keep a majority on the right braid here of the main Castle Creek channel. And right now they're proposing a 70-30 split. So of the volume of water that's coming down Castle Creek, this hardened riffle would divert 30% of the water in the creek back to this channel that is existing, and then 70% would be on this right channel right here. And
why do they want that?
I was just going to get to that. The whole purpose is that the applicants are stating this is a habitat improvement project, and we can let them get into the talk about the fish or insects or how the habitat in the stream would be improved. But that's what they're requesting, and that's what they're dubbing this as. So we can let them explain more on that one. So that's basically the project. So right here is where water would go into the left channel. The majority of the water would stay in the right. The Rafelson property would have some stream bank improvements on their western property line. That's the right descending bank of Castle Creek. And then 1892 Castle Creek would have some flood and bank stabilization control going on over here. The reason PT Ranch House LLC is part of the application is that they provide access to the creek. And like I said, this is all owned by PT Ranch, and the applicant would access the creek using an existing trail that's already been improved to allow for some machinery to get down to the creek and then do the work. When the project's done, if it's approved and when the project's done, they'll restore that area back to a natural state and back to a trail. So that's the basics for the project. Two things in addition to what I was just talking about is that the applicants in a clarification letter, which is attached to the draft BOCC resolution, they talk about monitoring. There's an agreement between the Rafelsons and the applicants about monitoring this 70-30 split. And the applicants are proposing to put a gauge in the river and evaluate, analyze how much water is being split in the right channel and the left channel, and then submit to the county a report stating how much is actually happening. And we can let them explain a little bit more on that too. And then secondly, I'll just add in, I got a letter from the DOW before the hearing, and they talked about timing for the project, and obviously there's a time frames that, some time frames that want to be avoided, for example, like in the spring and fall spawn. The DOW is asking that this, if approved, that this project get completed by the end of the calendar year. So we would add that into the BOCC resolution if the board saw fit. But that's about the overall proposal right there, and staff is recommending approval, subject to the draft resolution that you have in your packet.
So, Mike, going back to 1892, when that house was approved, that was probably pre-2006, before we had the 100-foot setbacks in place. Even though that property was then and currently is in a flood zone,
The house is not.
the house is not in a flood
Property
zone.
around it, it sits on a high spot on the lot.
But I thought I heard Mike say that they've had a sandbag currently, so to me that says that it's in a flood zone.
Well,
Are they able to get flood insurance?
Mapped floodplain and actual flood.
yeah. If you look at the 1041 map of old, you know, the 1041 hazard reviews we used to do, it shows the 100-year floodplain, and it shows the house and the improvements outside that floodplain. Now,
Do you know whether they're able to get flood insurance? And then I'm sure you'll address this this other idea in terms of the split, but it seems like that's a natural path that's been there for a long, long time, and it probably currently captures excessive water during high water runoff right now. And when it's not high water runoff, then water will take the course of the least resistance, obviously. So
are you talking about this braid right here, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was out there, like I say, a couple weeks ago when we've had a lot of water. There was just a trickle in it. We can ask the applicants what it does in true high water. I don't know if it captures that much water or not.
Yeah, because in the springtime is when you would see that being used.
Right.
All right. Questions for Mike? Michael?
Mike, were you present for our previous application discussion?
Yes.
Are there areas of these properties that have lawns coming down to the riverbank?
There's nothing like what you saw in the last one. These areas along the banks are actually pretty well vegetated with natural habitat and vegetation.
Any other questions at this time for Mike? Rachel?
I have a question, I'll put it out there, I'm not sure Mike's the best to answer it right now, but just looking at the jog of the river up here, could you tell me, is that more of a rock? What has created that jog to begin with, to go across that way? Is it a steep rock embankment? Is it was it previously fortified? It would look again that maybe over time the river would want to move through that area.
Yeah.
Just straighten it out.
I don't know the answer to that question. It's almost like this one right here. It's got the same kind of feature, just going to the left instead of the right. I can tell you this is all really well vegetated, really big spruce trees and cottonwoods all along right here. But we can ask the experts how it actually takes a jog like that, what that means.
Thank you.
Okay, Glenn, introduce yourself for the record, please.
Thank you. My name's Glenn Horn, and I represent the 3 property owners. Mike introduced their names, and the people who own those properties are Brian Trobert and Penny Pritzker. They're married, and they control those entities. And Bob Rafelson is here, as well as his wife Gabby. And as Mike said, this is the 4th property involved. And we've been working together, Bob, Gabby, and I, along with the applicants, pretty much since last fall, trying to come up with a plan that's mutually acceptable, to all the parties involved. And it's been really, a neighborly process, trying to reach common ground. The Rafelsons have tried to be very good neighbors. They've been experiencing several years of construction, and they're anxious for the construction on the property to end.
on the PT property. And I'll just mention that this area up here is really maybe 90 feet above the creek bottom down here. So there's a bench that's at Castle Creek Road level, and then you drop down, and the 1892 parcel and the Rafelson's parcel are down at the creek bottom. But everything else is well above. But this has been a cooperative, lengthy process trying to reach common ground between neighbors, and it's really been a lot of discussions, and we're glad to be where we are. We think we've resolved most issues between the different property owners. So Mike's described the properties. I want to introduce some of the people that are going to be presenting and are the experts on the creek. I'm just kind of orchestrating what's going on and trying to demonstrate compliance with the code. First, what's going to happen is Paul Sanford, who's a civil engineer from Allied Engineering in Montana, is going to be the first one who speaks, and he's going to address the flooding issues that have occurred here. And you'll see from Paul's presentation that most of the flooding issues are below the Rafelson Bridge, which is just below this island right here. It's right in this area right there. And you'll find that Bob is quite a resource in terms of what's been going on with this creek, because he's lived down along the creek since the early 1970s and probably knows more about this creek than any of the experts, just from observing it for all these years. So Paul's going to talk about the flooding, and then to describe to you what's going to be done to stabilize the creek banks and to create safety for the 1892 parcel and also for the Rafelson parcel, where there is a fire protection pond which was required to be built by the county and the fire department. And that pond is within several feet of the east bank of Castle Creek. And there has been a problem at that pond, and the reason why the bank has been fortified is because there was a break in an ice dam, of all things, several winters ago, which created an emergency situation along the bank, and steps were taken to stabilize that bank and save the Rafelson Fire Protection Pond, which is a requirement that it be there. So following Paul's discussion of what's going on from a flood standpoint, I'm going to introduce you to Matt Weaver of Five Rivers. Matt's appeared before this board before. I think, Steve, everyone has seen Matt appear here except you, and he's done several other projects in the county. He's from Montana. He's just completing a project in the Frying Pan now, and he really is an expert in how to work within the creek and the rivers and do things properly. And he's looked at this and has come up with a plan to deal with the flood situation below the bridge, and also address the idea of this 70-30 split right in this area where the Hardin Riffle's proposed, so that there can be a return of more flow to this westerly or left reach of the creek, which flows primarily with more water in the spring now. Over time, the river's been trending, the creek's been trending to the right, to the east, towards the Rafelson property. And what this would do is that it would return about 30% of the flow to the left reach of that stream. In addition to that, Mike's alluded to this monitoring program, which has been developed in cooperation with Gabby and Bob, so that we can monitor this proposed split. We're going to bring in a hydrologist who's going to do a baseline evaluation of the stream before any work is done in terms of what's going on. And we propose that it be monitored on an annual basis with a report after 5 years given to Picken County to determine the success of the stream work based upon the monitoring and whether or not more monitoring needs to occur in the future. Matt is also going to discuss what the enhancement is proposed for the creek and also the revegetation plan. Now, Mike Claffey is also here. Mike is a wetlands riparian expert, and he has evaluated the wetlands in the area and assisted us in coming up with a revegetation plan, which will all be along the lines of emphasizing the planting of riparian vegetation, primarily willows, cottonwoods, and some conifers that would be the natural vegetation that you would see in the creek bottom. There is, with the exception of the lawn at the 1892 parcel and a limited lawn on the Rafelson parcel, almost all the vegetation in the creek bottom is natural vegetation. Bob has planted hundreds of willows in this area. Oops, it's the wrong one. I might.
Yeah, I was going to say, hey, George, if you put that screen down, then Glenn can kind of point
But
to the
in this
screen.
area right there, right in here on Bob's property,
Yeah,
something in the,
There's
I turned.
two maps up
yeah,
at once.
Just turn that
Just
off,
said-
yeah.
With this one.
Yep.
Yeah, that'll help a little bit. This is a blow up. And let's slide it up a little, Mike. Okay, there you go. A little higher. That's good. Right there in this area here, these willows, those have all been planted by Bob over many, many years to create thick willow vegetation. And his pond is right in this area right there. And one of the things that we've noticed is there's really a lack of vegetation between the pond and the west bank of Castle Creek. And so part of this project is going to be reconstructing that bank and planting willows there. We'll get into this in more detail later. So with that as background, I want to introduce Paul, who's going to talk about the flood situation. Paul, you can be right in here.
Just before you go, just in case, are there any questions for Glenn right now?
Not yet.
No, okay. Okay.
Yeah, top one.
Thank you. I'm Paul Sanford with Allied Engineering, and I'll give a brief overview of some of the work we did to help characterize the hydraulics and investigate the flooding issues for the project. Let's see. So as Glenn said, a couple project elements here, the bank stabilization right here, the overflow channel is located right here, and then we have the hardened riffle up here. And I'll just start upstream and move down and talk about some of the work we did to investigate the hydraulics. Up at the hardened riffle, our work involved looking at low flow and trying to determine what sort of a structure is needed here to achieve that 30-70 split at low flow.
Can I ask a question, George? When you say hardened riffle, what do you mean by a hardened riffle?
Hardened riffle, in this case, it's just larger cobbles, rounded cobbles.
So you're talking about raising the stream bed there?
Actually, can I interject a little bit if it's okay? I'll be doing the hard riffle. Yeah, we just incorporate larger material into the existing natural riffle just to decrease the erosion potential of the riffle, where you normally would get on a steep riffle some head cutting and shape, moving that material up. That hardened riffle stabilizes that elevation and maintains it versus, it gives it over a broader area so that you're less likely to lose that cobble material and shift downstream. It's developed it in lieu of doing, rock drop structures and things like that, where you just have one single line of rocks. We just actually basically spread that over a longer area to make it look more natural and function better in the stream.
So you're reducing the velocity then of the...
We'd be raising the stream bed height in this case, which would have some effect upstream of reducing velocity, but at low flow.
Okay.
I'll let Paul.
Okay, hard riffle, large cobbles, okay.
So at low flow, we were trying to characterize the split and what sort of geometry would be needed for the hardened riffle. And then at high flow, our question was, at what point is this island inundated? In other words, at some point, you've got flow spreading across that whole area, and it really doesn't matter what's happening here at that point. because the water's just evening out across this whole area. And what we determined for that was that's about 400 CFS, which happens to be a flow that's estimated to occur for about a month in late June, early July in an average year. That island would be inundated.
And what's the low flow?
Low
CFS?
flow? Well, there's not a gauge on this stream, so I don't have that data.
But you estimated the high flow.
We estimated the high flow. There is a flood study that provides high flow data downstream.
Okay, so we don't know what the low flow is.
Don't know exactly what the low flow is. So that was looking at the hardened riffle area and the split flow. Next, moving downstream, in 2010 and 2011, flow overtopped a section of the bank about right in here, roughly 150-foot long section of bank that's lower. Traveled across the floodplain and headed towards the 1892 house. And there's a photo in tab 27 that shows flow going by the house. So with our hydraulic model, we wanted to try to estimate, what sort of an event does that occur with? In those 2 years, what sort of an event was that? And because this stream is engaged, what we did is we looked at other basins that had gauges and that were had similar basin characteristics to Castle Creek. And through that analysis, we were able to determine that that was about a 25-year event that produced flow in this floodplain. And a 25-year event has about a 4% chance of occurring every year. That's the actual definition, 4% chance every year. So that was the look at the existing conditions. At that point, we were able to characterize what sort of an event happened in those 2 years. And we determined that flow begins to overtop that bank at about 450 CFS. So similar to the flow where you would see this island become inundated. With that, looking at the proposed conditions, the purpose of our analysis was to provide design guidance and help with decisions for the design, and that enabled to determine the geometry of the hardened riffle up here. And in this area, we were able to characterize during various events such as the 10, the 50, the 100-year event, what sort of effect is this overflow channel having in reducing the flood elevations in this floodplain here. And what we determined for that is that on the upstream end of the channel, the flood elevations were reduced somewhere on the order of about 1.5 feet for the 100-year event. And then that effect decreases as the channel becomes steeper down here. And the reductions were on the order of about 0.3 feet at the lower end of the channel. So we found that overflow channel, as we designed it, had a pretty significant effect on reducing the floodplain elevation in the west floodplain there.
Paul, is that channel, it's excavated? Is that what you're talking about?
It's an excavated channel.
And is it left vegetated, or is it raw? What is it?
I'll give a brief description, and I'll let Matt or Mike jump in to talk more about it. But
it's revegetated.
It's revegetated. It's got it's armored at the bottom, and then it has topsoil, and then on top of the armor, and then it'll be revegetated.
Armored, when you say armored, do you mean in elevation you have cobble down
lower, yeah.
And then you have soil on top of that, and then you have vegetation on top.
Correct.
And it forms a depression of some sort.
Right. It's about a 14-foot width on average. around 2 to 3 feet in depth.
And how close then is it to the water table itself?
It'll be right at water. Right at water.
At water table.
It's going to be a sedge wetland in the summer, and then a flowing channel in the fresh water. Just to interject a little bit, when we originally looked at the property, the classic solution to prevent flooding at the house would have been to design a dike, build a reinforced dike in front of the house. And then with the situation there with that floodplain vegetation between the creek meander and the house, just looked at it and said, if we just had an overflow channel, it's a natural appearing functioning overflow channel, but the elevation of Castle Creek downstream of the house versus at that meander, we could drain, basically creating a drain when that floodwater came onto the floodplain, you would have an exit point. Instead of being through the house, it'd be parallel to the house and back down to the creek. So we build the overflow channel, and again, it's with riparian grasses, sedges, that sort of thing, willows on the banks. It would just naturally handle that flow. And we had the 1.5 foot reduction in flood height, which was about equivalent, if you look at the picture of the sandbag, this is about equivalent to the height of the sandbags in that flood in 2010 or 11. So, it meets the criteria of preventing those, at least a 25-year event flood from lapping up on the house, and doesn't involve filling in wetlands and narrowing the channel and restricting instead of restricting the flow of the floodway, we're actually increasing the volume of water that can go through the floodway instead of restricting it. So it seemed like a reasonable approach.
Is there some armoring though on that bank? I mean, how do you prevent the actual stream bank from being eaten away anyway?
Well, that's a good question. And when you asked that of Mike, I guess I would say that the bank in there now is armored. There was somebody had apparently done some work at some point with a backhoe or something, piled up some cobble. They put in some 2-foot diameter logs that are cabled into the bank.
Where have you seen that before?
And those are and those are secured with welded wire. And it's with some they're gabions constructed out of welded, sheet wire. And the bank is actually, I would call it stable now. 10 years from now, I don't know. As the wire rusts and breaks out, the log's about ready to decay. So it's a problem spot. We could just be kicking that can down the road if we didn't address it now.
So how are you addressing it now?
That bank we would remove the logs, the wire gabions, and the piled up cobble and replace them with larger rock riprap keyed into the stream bed with willows and stuff incorporated inside the rock with the soil encapsulated lift on top of that with more willows and vegetation, grass vegetation. So it would be an armored bank, but we try to incorporate as much vegetation as we could.
The soil encapsulated lift is like what we did on the Roaring Fork upstream of Aspen, but not as many lifts, just one lift on top of the rock.
Just like that lower bank going into North Star. Yeah.
Your question, Richard?
Yeah. Been jumping around a little bit, but see if I can come back. I wanted to ask, on the 70-30 split on the water, do you anticipate that split to be year-round or just during shoulder seasons of the high runoff, or?
Well, our focus was looking at lower flows.
Because that's where I was just wondering whether the lower flow time period would be perhaps detrimental to stream temperature, and in real low flow years, which we never know when they'll occur, just like we don't know when the 500-year floods occur. But I'm just wondering if that could be detrimental to the fisheries and things like that by diverting the water over and having a warm channel at 30 and this one being much lower flow anyhow at 70. Shouldn't it perhaps be designed that it would work during medium years or an average year, but during a low flow year, you would still keep more of the water in the main channel?
Matt, you want to?
Tough question. I would say during a real drought year, like a 2002 year, there probably wouldn't be very much water in that channel. When Paul says low flow, he means after high water, July, August, September, normal flows.
And I mean a low year.
Well, I guess I'd start off by saying is that in the short length of the side channel, say we're in a situation where Castle Creek's going, say 20 CFS or something, let's pull a number out. And then we have 4 CFS going down the side channel. The length of that channel and the grade of it, wouldn't expect there'd be very much temperature increase in that channel. There obviously would be some. I would be, I don't have any data on this, but I'd be surprised if you could measure it. But the other thing would be is now even if you increase the water temperature a degree or two, you're mixing back, only with 30% of the water with a 1 or 2 degree temperature rise back into 70%. I mean, it would fairly dilute any type of temperature increase, I would believe. But then, I talked with Kendall Backage, CDO, or Colorado Division of Wildlife and Parks now, about this when we were on site and before we designed the project, and she was well in favor of any channel diversity we could maintain by keeping water in that
spawning areas,
spawning and juvenile habitat, and just increasing the amount of wetted perimeter of the stream, riparian vegetation, everything. So I would think that those benefits would outweigh the temperature. I can't say that there wouldn't be a temperature increase, but I would not expect it to be very significant.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want to be, we keep looking at the climate change projections and things like that where they're anticipating up to 20% decrease in flows annually, an average, to have done any damage. But I would be the first to acknowledge the benefit of some off main stem channels on streams like this.
And she sees, I talked to her, and she sees it a lot, is the side channel development on rivers and not just on, not on Castle Creek specifically, but the side channels are disappearing because of development and rip-wrapping and increased velocities and river channels, and those things are going away. And it's a fairly important integral part of a healthy riparian system. So.
And also add, there's something that hasn't been said, is the reduction in flow in that side channel isn't something that happened over a long course of years. It happened relatively recently. And Bob will tell you that it flip-flops back and forth sometimes where there's a lot more flow in the side channel than it has over the years. But a bunch of cobble dropped out, probably in the 2011 event. It's had flow in it not that long ago.
And one other follow-up question, George. In looking at the pictures of the flood event with the 25-year flood, it really looks like it's streaming across a hard surface driveway area, maybe a snowmelt driveway or something like that. And some of it's wet, some of it's not. And then it's lawn area. But shouldn't there be more of a permeable surface there where that driveway is to work in concert with the channel you're providing?
I don't know. I'd have to refer back to an engineer on that. That's
I mean, it just seems that this may work in that 25-year or the 100-year event, but again, Colorado's been experiencing some extreme weather of late, and I'm just wondering if that is sufficient.
Well, if you, looking at, are you looking at Figure 2?
Yes, the bottom with the driveway and,
Okay.
and showing the water across hardscape.
The lower photo, you can kind of see the sandbags upper right corner there, and then the upper photo you can see the sandbags, and that's a pervious area that's available right there. And I think the bulk of the flow in those two events was not on that impervious area, but on that impervious surface there. I mean the pervious surface, the grass. So.
Again, but would you think it would improve the functioning of the area to have more of a permeable driveway? I mean, I'm just suggesting as the homeowners like to protect their home in the future, that might be an improvement they'd like to consider as well.
Are you talking about a pervious driveway?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've used different paver systems that have, more of an ability for some grass in between and absorption.
I think with the volumes of flow that we were talking about for these events, I don't think it would have much of a difference. I don't think it would make much of a difference. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
We're jumping around a little bit. I just want to make sure, Paul, you still have some more of your presentation to do, or?
That I don't. I just can answer questions at this point.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that we're sort of tackling this sort of in stages. We need to keep track of what's going on. So, questions for Paul?
Questions for Paul.
Yeah.
I'm concerned if the 30%, 70% split is accomplished, and all it would take would be one tree to fall in the river, and you'd have 100% going down the side channel. And then at the bottom of the island, that's going to be directed right at the bank of the Rafelson property. And I would hope that that is kept in mind, that potentially would be jeopardizing the bank on the, directed right at their house. If you can picture all the water going down that other channel and then going back across the stream.
And I think that could occur right now as well. You could have a tree block that, and they could send all the water to the side channel. So I think that's something that could occur without the project happening.
Glenn, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just this is something that has come up time and time again in discussions with Bob, because he's lived there for so long. And the key, what you say is exactly true, Steve. You have to watch what's going on in the creek. You have to watch for trees that may fall and float down both on this property or from up above. You got to keep an eye on new beaver dams. Bob pointed out evidence, obvious examples to me and also to Matt and Mike, where beaver dams have been formed that have changed the flow of the stream. Right now we have a leaning tree right above the hard riffle location that is going to be in the creek, just could be the next storm. So what we've talked about is an agreement between Bob and Gabby and the applicants, and I'll introduce Andy Poole, who's the caretaker who's lived on the property 7 years, to just keep walking the creek, monitoring what's going on, and for example, we've agreed that this leaning tree needs to be removed, and as part of this project, it will be removed. I guess it's coming across almost at 4 o'clock, and more like 10 o'clock right now. And it'll be coming down. And the thing that we have in agreement between the neighbors is that the Rafelsons and the applicants are each going to be responsible for taking care of any damaged vegetation on their own property to avoid anything that might block the flow of the creek.
Okay.
I might add one other thing too, and that's one of the, take a look at the hardened riffle and spreading that grade out over basically a platform versus a single drop structure. You don't tend to grab that type of material as it rolls down. But the channel width there and the size, the tree that they're talking about is, it would completely block the channel. It would drop, if it dropped across the river, it would dam up the channel and also be a threat to the bridge downstream too. That is an issue too.
Okay.
That raises some questions.
Second question for Paul. It was mentioned in the application that part of the problem was caused by where the bridge is located. It narrows the channel and increases the velocity of the river. And then that is hitting the bank down where the flooding occurs on the other side. Is there any possibility of making the bridge longer and widening the channel there to lessen that impact of the velocity of the river?
Well, I can't speak for the possibility of that project occurring, but I think larger bridges do reduce the velocity through. You don't see the you don't see as high a velocity through a larger bridge, but I don't know that it would, it's something that I haven't looked at.
Okay. Go ahead.
There's one thing about the bridge I want to mention. It's been on that property since 1959, and the bridge has never been damaged in any of the events. That's a pretty big window of time. It's not 100 years, but the bridge is in good shape. It's solid, and it has not ever been damaged. And Bob would know, he's been there the whole time. So it did predate, the type of reviews that we're doing now. And Bob inherited the bridge when he bought the property, but it's still in excellent condition.
Okay. And final question, is there any evidence that the main creek went kind of in the vicinity of where the overflow channel is proposed now? I've seen places where a creek, Capitol Creek, has done a right angle like that just because of one tree falling in the river, and it changes the course of the river, and that could have happened 100 years in the past or something to create that sharp bend in the creek. And maybe the natural place the creek wants to be is kind of where you are proposing the overflow channel.
And I think I'll defer that to Matt, who's walked that section more than I have.
That's a good question. I think there's no doubt that the channel, as the meanders migrate, they tend to migrate, both laterally and downstream. So it's not too far a stretch to imagine that years down the road, that whole meander bed being just migrating straight down towards the house. There is quite a few big trees, cottonwoods and spruce trees in there, so it would have a tendency to slow that down. I think there's no doubt that at one time there was probably overflow channels and Old Creek Channel on the site near where the 1892 house is constructed, maybe not on the high spot, but it's probably migrated all the way through there. There does seem to be, there's an existing side channel swale, and I guess, Paul, if you do, that kind of that low spot where the water flows through kind of joins up with our swale. There's an existing,
right there?
Yeah, low spot that kind of goes through there. That probably is an old overflow channel or main channel migrated through there. So the tendency of the river probably would be to migrate downstream right towards the house. Definitely. But I'm with you. I mean, I tell people all the time, it does that until 2 cottonwood trees fall in and an ice jam forms, and then it goes someplace else. So you can do, I've always said you can do all the engineering and pre-planning you want, and there's no accounting for what comes off the riverbanks or comes down the channel will do to the channel. So, but downstream of the bridge, there was one other issue there. There was a gravel deposit right down below the not gravel, it was cobble deposit downstream of the bridge. The velocity under the bridge is competent to carry 6-8-inch cobble through that section, and then when it slowed down as it came out the downstream side, 100 feet downstream, it tended to just drop it right there. And it did form a large, I guess you'd call it overly high bar there that the stream was going around and sending more water to the bank. And part of our original proposal was to reduce that bar height. But in subsequent runoff events since we first looked at it, it's kind of planed itself off, and it's kind of back to a more natural, it's all natural, but a more, seems like appropriate elevation for what you'd want to see there. So that was one effect, is that it does kind of tend to cause a rapid transport of material and rapid deposition right below the bridge.
Glenn, where do you go from here in terms of the presentation?
Matt, do you want to, have you touched upon the things you wanted to say, or do you want to just go through what's left over, or do you have comments?
You've got to be getting pretty close unless there's specific questions about
then
design elements.
Perhaps we should have, is Mike going to add anything so we sort of get a full picture here, and then we can drill down on some questions?
No, but there are a few things. that we want to cover that I think it's important that Bob speaks to what has been worked out between the neighbors and what his observations are about the stream situation based upon all the years that he's lived there. So I'd like you to hear from Bob, and then we can take questions or add any additional comments if necessary.
There are two elements that we didn't discuss, that Matt didn't get to talk about, that would be in the plan. One is in that side channel that's going to get the 30% flow, we're planning some fish habitat work in there. It's very minor.
Adding additional spawning, Kendall recommended that we add spawning gravel to a couple sites in there, and we create a log jam, small log jam woody debris feature for juvenile trout. Nothing large, nothing that can blow out and jam anything out, but smaller.
And then down at, Paul, can you point out at just that crosshatched area, just south of the driveway into 1892? Up the top.
It looked
That's the top. Left.
To the left.
Yeah. Well, it was, anyway, no. Well, there's two things.
Right there?
Yeah, right there. Got
Okay.
it, perfect. That's an existing ditch that runs along the lawn of 1892. When Matt removes willows and vegetation from the overflow channel area, we're going to plant them there. So kind of restore a wetland in that area. So some of the lawn area will be restored to wetlands. There'll be dense plantings, so it will also help with that overflow. If the overflow channel doesn't carry everything, the water coming will then be knocked back into the vegetation. And then there's a rock dike that somebody built a long time ago to the right of the 1892 house that would be removed and restored to wetland and riparian vegetation.
Okay. Bob?
Yes, I fear and tremble a bit about my appearance here. I wasn't planning on coming. Some events have taken place in the last 6 hours that require talking to you folks. I'm happy to answer any questions about the history. If you have questions that are more specific about, or some of the specific ones, I think I do know the man fairly well for having lived there for a very long time. And when I say I tremble, it's because all of this is relatively meaningless to me. And I'm going to tell you why. I've lived in Aspen for many years. By the way, I don't know how many acres are involved in the PT property, but mine is approximately 1 acre. And I have fought desperately to maintain my privacy and my solitude, if you will, for a number of years. And it's not easy to maintain. Over the last many years, the people who sold the house to the PT folks had 3 houses. Those 3 houses, as part of this new arrangement, were destroyed and leveled and taken away. Next door to me is the 1892 property. That went up. Then, of course, the PT property, which was supposed to, in its original declaration, be about 2 to 3 years in construction, has been going on for more than double that, maybe 5 years. So I have been more concerned about what it constitutes being a good neighbor, which, that's why I say this may not pertain, and if you say it doesn't pertain, I'll shut up. But it means a great deal to me, and that's why I have signed aboard this. Only for that reason. I want my neighbors to be happy, because if they're unhappy, I will undergo greater stress. I can give you countless examples of this. But in the history of this property, 5 buildings have been torn down. I've saved 2 people from avalanche personally, and other properties that are now 1892. There was a culvert, by the way, that went in the other direction entirely from the ones that you're contemplating putting in. But I don't mind what they want to do. I'm not very expert at understanding riffle any more than maybe you, but you guys understand it more than I do. I do trust that these guys know what they're doing, but my reason for signing aboard is to make my neighbors happy. I also do believe that they have been flooded, but so have I, which isn't mentioned here at all. When you say their house was flooded, I believe it was maybe an inch or two of water in the very, Andy can speak to this, I never went in there, I was undergoing spinal surgery at the time, but there was some water in the first, just at the entrance level, right, Andy?
Yes.
It wasn't a flooding the way you would imagine. Now, I've also said over the years that there have been other efforts, illicit efforts, to manipulate the stream, that you folks don't need to know who did it or why it was done, and they've all been failures. Just to give you an example, one neighbor reconstructed the river without license. It sent my way a huge amount of debris, thousands of dead fish, mud in the water. I tried to contact that person and say, listen, do you know what's going on? He was out of town, he did not respond. The county eventually did find out about it and made him change everything. So I've witnessed a lot of tampering with the river. Now, we're living in an odd time. And this is particularly true of Colorado and even more specifically now, Aspen. Nobody knows what climate change is going to do. Nobody knows whether or not the hydro movement, which God knows you're an expert on, Rachel, will affect things. So, for example, what if hydro passes next year and the 70-30 flow is decreased by 30%? Just as an example. I'm willing to put all of this aside, but I want you to know the history of how we've arrived at this point, if you care to know. If you don't care to know, I'll just shut up.
Well, I guess the question is, are there any issues that you're concerned about? That's
Yes.
probably more pertinent.
Yes. And that is only one, and that is being a good neighbor. I have made efforts over the many years since these folks bought the place. They're very busy. I don't know if you know who they are, but they're very busy people. One of them happens to be the Secretary of Commerce of the United States. She's one of the richest women in the United States, if not the world, and they're very difficult to meet with. I have offered on every occasion where I knew they might be coming out or suggested that they do come out and meet with me so that I could help in their understanding of where they lived, what they were going to confront, and whatnot. So a house, for example, that is going to take a couple of years to build, at least in the initial projection, and goes on, might go on because one of the owners feels that the cladding on the outside of the house has to be a very specific rust color, and goes to somebody and they get that color, they get the assurance, but then the company that makes the cladding goes bankrupt. Well, that adds perhaps 7 months, 8 months, and close to, I would guess, $700,000 in the expense of the house. And when I question them about this, they say money doesn't count. Well, it doesn't count to them, and it doesn't count to me, but rebuilding the house means a great deal to me. And if I can help these folks understand that, including the river, including things, I suggested, for example, that they do nothing down by the bank of the river, where there are two roads that approach this. Now, you can flip the thing on, but anyway, there were two little tiny footpaths that led to the river. And when the river was originally suggested that it flow more on their side where there was none, I said, you better maybe move out here and experience it for just a little bit. Spend 2 weeks here in the summertime so you can understand that. I have seen that river where it's 100% flow coming directly at my house. I've seen that river where it's 70-30. Andy's been here 7 years. We've had a drought years during that time. We have had terrible manipulations in the sense that there was a red dust cloud that came up from Arizona. It melted the snow on Mount Hayden almost overnight, and the whole damn place got flooded, and that's when their house got hit, and that's when my house got hit. Boulder is a perfect example. Anybody in this room could not have told me 3 months ago that we were going to have floods in Boulder. Oh, a couple of people might have known that there was one in 46 and there was one in 71.
I want to just interrupt you because we need to move this hearing on. So okay. What I hear from you is you're comfortable in terms of supporting this effort because you want to be a good neighbor, and hopefully that this will certainly...
Except that as of this morning, at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock this morning, we have a contract, it's in there, that we drew up, that there was an agreement that we had agreed that it would be put into a small contract. It's a page or two. It's in your application. And that this would be to reduce the grief of the Rafelses after so many years of construction and noise, including last week, including tomorrow. I just said, well, can we do, and one of the owners said, most assuredly, and we should memorialize that and put it into, well, the language flew back and forth over the last 10 days or so, and this morning, yesterday, Glenn sent me a proposal which said we agree to agree, because we can't get all the specifics worked out now, and that the Pritzkers were willing to sign it, and would I be willing to sign it? We said yes. It was changed this morning. And while there is still an agreement to agree, it has been modified, which says that there are no assurances that we may ever agree. I am being required to sign off on that in order to approve this application. And as I say to you, if your intent in life is to have good neighbors, you don't want to have that kind of change of mind 5 hours before the hearing. Does that make sense to you?
So, Bob is required needs to sign off on this work for this work to go forward. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we have an agreement which is in your packet.
Which section
It's section number 2. It's attachment number 2. So this was the agreement for the submission of the application. It took many months to prepare. What Bob's referring to is an addendum to the agreement that we've been working on, and that addendum, which is not in here, is something that we're still working on, which is an agreement to agree.
But my question is, if Bob does not agree with this moving forward, can this move forward without Bob's agreement?
The work on Bob's property cannot move forward, so his agreement is critical to that.
So, I mean, very similar. What's that noise?
Someone doing work outside.
The neighbors.
It reminds me of the land use issue we had regarding the North Fork, where we had to go back and forth. We ended up having to table it because nothing could go forward until the agreement was signed and delivered. And there were changes at the last minute amongst those people as well. And so we said, well, you guys have to work it out first, and then we can move forward. But we're not going to get involved in a legal battle between you and the principals.
I am prepared, despite what I regard as my own personal integrity and what I thought was a promise from my neighbors towards a good neighborly understanding, to sign off on the latest, the one I got at 5:30 this morning. But I would like to add to the commission's attention the history of that correspondence. I just would like it on the record.
That's fine, but ultimately, what you sign is your agreement, whether that's complete in terms of your mind or not. So you can sign that, or you can wait and try to further negotiate.
This relates to something that I do want to ask the commission, because I just don't know the answer. How is this executed? In other words, you folks are going to approve something, and it has standards applicable. Let me give you an example. What do you call that? A rendition of what the shoreline is going to look like once
The rendering.
it's a rendering. I have yet to see it. What if it fails to get to me? What this whole thing gets slowed down, or I am ignored because the neighbors don't care whether they send it to me? What is the process of execution now? Because I am going to sign off on it, but I have a fear that nobody gives a damn whether or not they live up to these agreements or not. That's my paranoia. They're good people. I have no doubt that if they lived here, things would go differently. But they don't. They live in a whole other world, and they work through surrogates. He is one of those surrogates. Andy, I hope, because I like him very much, is one of those surrogates. There have been others I don't like and have refused to talk with. I just want to know, what's the process going to be? And is it part of the application? It's one thing to say you're going to do this, 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 and this. But what happens if you don't do it?
Well, if it's in anything that we approve with any conditions, that needs to be followed up. Otherwise, there are repercussions.
And with whom, sir?
With the county. And I'll let our attorney address that.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused because my understanding of the status is that Mr. Rafelson is a co-applicant.
No. And never have been.
He's gave permission.
Exactly.
Consent.
For the application to go forward.
The application is,
For the reasons I said, Richard.
but the work is taking place on both properties.
Yes, that didn't...
So without your consent as a property owner, this application is concluded. There's no ability to go forward.
You've made your point and I've answered it.
So, do you understand, I guess, are we talking in the same direction? Yeah, my understanding was that you're an applicant. If you're not an applicant, then at the very least, you're giving your permission for the applicant.
He's at the very least giving us permission for work to be done on his property. He
That's
is
what
not
I'm
a
doing.
co-applicant.
So, the way that translates is that I guess you're in the catbird seat.
I'm in the captain's... No, I wouldn't say that I was. I have no idea. That would be up to you folks. If I thought that I could do that, I might have taken that approach. But I don't want to do that because I still want to be a good neighbor. I don't want to be in the catbird seat.
And that's great, and how you go forward is totally up to you, but this can't go forward without you.
Yeah, John, I think what he's asking is that should it go forward, should
Right.
it be approved? In our packet, material representations, item number 2 is a contract between the two of them. And it seems that that would be a material representation during our hearing as something for the approval that they would have to live up to. And he's asking what power, lever, or not would he have
All of
to
it.
enforce this? And if the county would then have an enforcement role over this contract between the two as part of the approval for
And not
Yeah.
just the contract between us, the letter of agreement, but everything in there.
Everything, yes, gotcha. The appearances and the outcome of the,
We do not enforce private agreements. We only conduct a regulatory function on an applicant. In other words, we review and take action upon applications for work. If the application is granted and work proceeds in accordance with that development permit that is the result of the application and any conditions that are put on it, then we are satisfied. We only care about the regulatory process, not agreements between private parties. However, the way this application is presented, it has work being done on numerous properties, yours being one of them. At least that's how it appears in this application. Without your consent as a property owner to this application or your active participation in it, this particular application cannot go forward. Now, the property owner for PT Ranch can come back with something that is only on their property, perhaps, but this item that's in front of the board right now can only proceed the way it's in front of the board with everybody's consent.
And so you can be a good neighbor, but you have to understand you're sort of in charge of your own destiny.
Look, there's very little in the private contract that isn't already in the application, because in the last several weeks we have added clarifications which become part of the application. I would say probably about 30 of them or something like that, a bunch of clarifications. So I don't think that I'm going to worry too much about the enforcement of my personal contract, which is to say, I give you a bunny for Valentine's Day and you give me one. I don't mean that. I do mean that everything that is in this application isn't be enforced and enforceable. And if so, how?
If there is a violation of the approval, which could relate back to representations made within the content of the application, then the county would take whatever appropriate remedial action would be necessary, including litigation, against the parties involved on whose property the work is taking place. That includes you.
so we could sue both of them for
Exactly.
non-performance of the contract, but not one of the other.
It appears to me, and there's obviously a lot more going on that I'm aware of, I cannot take,
Well,
but it appears to me that you
are
are
going on that I'm aware of.
that
too.
you are part of this application. You're in it, and as a consequence, anything that does not happen according to whatever the board may approve would fall upon the various property owners.
Well, I'm puzzled now for a second now, because this work that is being done on side channels on their property, I have no control over. Work that is being done on the river, the embankment of the river, requires their being in my part of the river, the stream. And I could be sued because they make a mistake?
Yeah, it's your property. You have ultimate responsibility for your property. Maybe you need a longer agreement than just 2 pages, I don't know.
Well, may I just comment, in the clarification letter, which is attachment B in Mike's packet, it addresses the work that's going to be done on Bob and Gabby's property, which is essentially the repair and reconstruction of the east bank of Castle Creek between the creek and the fire protection pond. So that's going to be reconstructed with cobble. The sandbags are going to be removed, and willows are going to be planted there. The letter says that work's going to be done while Bob or Gabby or both of them are on the property. And so that work has to be completed as represented
by this fall.
In the application. Right, correct. So that is the work on your property that's going to be done as part of our agreement.
That's the work that is directly on my property, but I own half the river, so to speak. So anything that goes on across, you have to be on, you can't get there without being in my part of the river, because that's where you're putting in the hard ripple. And I would also like to know that down below where the 1892 house is that going to get more stream? It's absolutely naked now. It's 50 yards of rock. Or do you, don't you know?
Is this area right here is where you're referring to?
Yes,
Okay.
the further downstream from their house and my house.
So Bob, again, if these are concerns of yours, then as John suggested, you may need more than a two-page agreement to really cover all of these fine points and make sure all parties really understand before starting this work. I mean, it's complicated, so I don't think you want to rush this, and I think you want to really think about it.
Just to add to that, for us to table it for 2 weeks is not an unusual delay and not necessarily something that makes you a bad neighbor. I've always felt that contracts are there to exist, to have good relationships, and to have clarity as to what both parties are going to perform and what their expectations are. And if you do not feel fully covered by the agreement that's in place and want to request a rendition of what the banks should look like after they're finished so that you can hold that up in a year or two and determine whether they fulfilled their end of the contract, we certainly can table that at this point in time and see if agreement's reached 2 weeks from now. Might be your best leverage in getting the assurances you want.
My fear is that it will delay this work being done.
Until, past next season.
That's the whole reason is to get this done and get it out of the way, because it has been very combative and it has caused bad relations. So I sign aboard to get it done, and then I say, I ask for clarification. Could you show me what the shoreline is going to look like? Mr. Rafelson, you're the only one who can see the shoreline, so of course we will appease you with the revegetation of the shoreline. Okay. If I'm not appeased, what happens?
I think you need to see that first and decide if that rendition is sufficient for you.
We've been asking for it, Rachel, for a month.
I know, that's why we perhaps should table this and not go forward. If there's not agreement among the parties and that you do not feel adequately protected and they haven't been able to produce it in a month, it gives them another 2 weeks and we can go from there.
If you guys approve this today and don't table it, and Bob sees a rendition that he doesn't like, he can then say to PT Ranch, I do not want you to go on my property. And then nobody does the work on his property, period. We write you a letter saying, we did the work all on PT Ranch property, we didn't go on Bob's property.
No. I don't think so.
No. It's an application that it's a commitment to do all the things that are in this proposal.
So Bob, I would take a deep breath and sort of rethink this, because you're here for the long run. Your neighbors may or may not be here for the long run. Properties come and go, as you know.
George, could I request a 5-minute recess and we'll give the parties a little time to think and use the restroom?
Yeah, that'd be great. Good idea. Grassroots, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Mike,
Okay, we're back. Bob?
Well, first of all, I appreciate Rachel's advice or comment. It seems to me that to make me feel comfortable, I want two things. I want for the project to be able to go forward in this fall period. As I said outside, once you get into December, this is pretty rough stuff to do, unless December turns out to be Miami, and it could, we don't know. And I want this to take place now. And I have my reasons for it are not just good neighborly, just to get it out of my brain, so I don't have to spend another year doing this kind of work with Glenn. And the other thing is that I don't want any liability with regard to the work that's being done on this river. I am not the applicant. I am permitting the applicant to go ahead and do stuff, but it doesn't, and with the exception of the stuff you're doing on my property, I'm also told that if I don't sign on, this application is dead, which I didn't know either. It may not stop them from making a new application for upriver revisions or for just working on their property without being in my water. I mean, did I get that part right? So that I need to make an agreement with them, which is unenforceable by you. Go ahead.
Let me just say that I would, in the event that there is not an agreement that satisfies Bob and Gabby with respect to the issue of liability for work done on their property, and we can't reach that agreement, we would still like to proceed and just remove the Rafelson property from the application. We would like it to be done all together, but I don't want to be in a situation where we have to submit an entirely new application and go through the process just to remove a piece of the property, because it's very distinct. We would just remove the Rafelson property from the application and ask to proceed.
So
That's not what we're doing now, but what I think Bob's getting at is, could we continue this application for a couple weeks, and we will work together to develop this agreement that relieves the Rafelsons of liability for work done on their property that they're not doing, that the applicant would do, so that if that work failed for some reason and there was damage to a downstream property owner, that they would not have liability for that work because they didn't do the work.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to bring this up, but can you do the work to save that 1892 property from flood without being on my property or affecting my property?
Everything except the exception, we were going to remove some of the cobble from the site.
No,
And that would be the only, the cobble in the center of the river. The bank revetment work goes right up to that property corner stake. So it's downstream.
But the cobble in the middle is not intrinsic to...
It's not, no, I would say it's not, we don't have to do that.
So I'm going to suggest we continue this. There's too many little outstanding issues that we're not going to resolve here today, and give you guys some time to work on it.
And still be able to get this done.
Well, who knows? But I'm going to accept the motion to table this at this point.
October 8th is our next meeting?
9th.
October 9th.
Let me just see something here, though. October 9th, Lance?
Quick question.
Not yet. Do you have an idea, Lance? October 9th, we've got all the Lanedo and Last Chance parcels.
That is going forward. We have everything we need. We had not intended to continue that.
Okay, so, but we can add this to it.
We can add this and hopefully do it first if it's a closure issue. I mean,
Well, we can also ask Lanedo 12, having put it off for 3 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Put it off 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Just a point of clarification, what I'm hoping is that it's a cleanup item where we're just addressing this issue, because if there are other technical questions that you might have to ask Paul, Mike, or Matt, I would ask that you do that now, because these guys have traveled a long way to get here, so that we can just focus on this one outstanding issue. And if you have any other concerns, please let me know, and we'll address them in the 2-week period.
All right, great, thank you. So let's sort of step aside with Bob's issue and go back to the application as it stands. If there's any outstanding questions or issues that we need to discuss. Steve?
I'm concerned about trying to improve the creek up by the island and diverting some of the water down another channel. This has nothing to do with alleviating the flooding at the house. It's just manicuring the creek to make it please the landowners on that side of the creek is what that is. I think I would be more comfortable with the application if that part was not in it and just leave the creek to its devices there. It probably will go back and forth periodically from one side to the other with more water on one side eventually and more water on the other side. It's not an essential part at all of solving the flooding problem. I like the fact that there's lots of wetland kind of vegetation on the property and that has not been manipulated at this point. And I would feel comfortable with doing the overflow channel because I think that would be a solution. That probably would solve the water going right up to the house. And then let it grow back into willows and alders and whatever else would grow in there is what I would prefer to have happen, and not try to manipulate it too much. But once the major earthwork is done to make the channel, then just let it go back to nature at that point. I think that would probably work for taking, when the stream does overflow, letting it go back into.
Excuse me, we're just going to deal.
Letting it go back into Castle Creek without flooding the house at all. And I like the part of the application removing the work that has been done and on both sides of the creek. Just would make it look more natural if that was removed and put back more in the natural state.
Okay. Michael?
A question then to the experts is, I mean, from what I've seen on this project, most of the areas are sort of, or at least the areas that are riparian, they're strongly riparian, right? I mean, we don't have lawn running up to the edge of the streams here. And is that going to be the continued state of these various properties?
Yes.
Yes. In fact, we go more riparian because we do get rid of a little bit of lawn in the 1892.
Because that was a concern in the previous application, that they were trying to control the stream and yet had, from my point of view, it contributed to the...
It's very natural, Michael, what's down here now. As a matter of fact, this area over here has been restored by the applicants, in that there was a AstroTurf golf hole down there that has been removed, and it's being revegetated with wetlands and riparian area. But it's very natural, which is why it's why Bob and Gabby like it so much. I mean, there's a beautiful walking path, and it's all wetland and riparian.
Okay, well, that's the only question I have.
Rachel?
Well, to follow up on Michael's comment, and agreed that it maintains a lot of riparian habitat now, but because it was approved under the older code, there would be nothing to prevent this owner or future owners from doing more of a bluegrass lawn down to the river's edge. Is it a defined activity envelope outside of which those riparian areas must be left undisturbed?
PT Ranch development, the new development totally is under the new code.
It is totally now, so they could not manipulate the vegetation to change it.
1892 house would have an envelope that would be
20 feet.
20 feet, yeah, from the.
Okay, so there is those protections even though they're...
PT is way away and has an envelope line that protects that area.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Other issues or concerns? Mike?
So Steve mentioned his discomfort with the graded section of the river. Is it purely an enhancement for the property owners, or is there some basic riparian reason to channel 3070?
Yes, there is. It would increase the channel diversity and habitat diversity of that section of the stream, providing, as we mentioned before, smaller channel, juvenile fish habitat, spawning habitat, and just actually more wetted perimeter of stream. So it's just actually increasing the stream area, so you would have an increase in biota and stuff in that section of creek.
You have to get a fish habitat improvement permit from the Corps of Engineers for that part of the project, and that has to be approved by the DOW, and the DOW reviewed it and approved it.
And like I said, I mentioned earlier, and Kendall Baggage, I don't know if you're familiar with her, she is the fisheries biologist for that drainage. And I had her on site, and before we even started design work on the project, and I can paraphrase, I think, pretty comfortably what she said. She would like to see side channel habitat protected, preserved, and enhanced if we could do that.
And if there were willows and along the banks, that would tend to keep the temperatures lower in that stream no matter what, right?
And it is well vegetated at this point right now. I mean, honestly, it's the island section of that is, I mean, you couldn't walk across that if you wanted to. It's thick willows. And the bank on the, so it'd be the left ascending bank is fairly good willow growth, some natural, looks like some spruce and cottonwoods growing in there. It's real healthy stream bank.
So that wouldn't be degraded, that would be, if anything, improved.
No, and it doesn't need erosion protection in there. The vegetation's holding that. And actually, to go back to what you were talking about before with the manicuring lawns and things, it would not be in the interest of those property owner down there to remove willows at all. I mean, that is their full protection and erosion protection.
Well, some property owners work against their own interests, as you saw.
Nicely pointed out, because I have for 50 years tried to get them to put the willows there.
I did want to go back and have one clarification. Paul and I were talking outside in the break when you mentioned the log jamming up on the side channel. If that, Paul could probably address that. When that occurs, actually the water would transfer. It wouldn't just all go down the one side channel. It would actually go over the top of the island at those kind of flood stage and even out back over the channel. So you likely wouldn't have just a chute coming out, or 100% of the flow went into that one side channel and shot towards the bridge.
Yeah, if you look at the last figure in this book, it shows kind of a schematic of, when a certain flood level is reached, that an island is inundated with water. So even if the log forced water over there, it would shortly downstream and overtop the island and spread out.
May I ask one more question?
To whom?
Specific to what you're asking.
Okay.
In the original application, the upper work on the upper part of the river was also under the application of flood control. Does it contribute to flood control at all, what you're doing in the upper thing? Or is it purely cosmetic recreation, which is what he's asking?
Well, I think, for lower flows that may still be at the upper end of the flow that occurs that year, but maybe not a large flood. Having that side channel take more flow would reduce the pressure on that right bank on new property.
But nothing on theirs, because in the original application it was all for theirs.
Nothing on theirs.
Nothing. It's not for flood control.
All right, let's bring it back to the board here. Rachel?
I would make a motion to continue this item until Wednesday, October 9th.
Second.
Okay, and then
This
that,
is a public hearing. Anybody wish to make any comments on this? Seeing that, I'll close the public hearing. You're an applicant, so.
I just have, I would like to maybe ask for a straw poll from the board and to see where you stand on the 70-30 issue. I think it would be very helpful because we've heard from Steve, but
Yeah.
I'd like to know whether that's still an issue.
yeah, thanks for asking, Glenn, because I was planning on addressing that during my comment after the motion was made. When I look at the plan and have heard the testimony and the concerns, I really think all the components work together. I think that it would be valuable to try to work out an agreement for the other concerns that have been raised. Absolutely. But I look at this as being very minimal in terms of the improvements, and I do think that the components work together. I just don't think you can put one thing in the river and then, hope that that won't bounce too much towards your property. And there's so many things here, the removal of the cobble pile, the removal of the stacked rock dike, the hardened riffle, the ability to use some of that channel. And that smaller channel, I did ask my questions. I think they were satisfactorily answered, but it really reminds me of down at the Aspen Art Museum, where the Roaring Fork has a side channel that allows some of the flow to go in that side channel and not continue to erode the bank of the Art Museum during those high water runoff time periods. And so I can see the value of doing that. So I just think that all these components work together, and I really hope that the applicants and the neighbors as a neighborhood can present this as a successful project and everyone have their needs met.
So, the board, is the board comfortable for the most part in terms of how this application looks? Okay.
Well, if I told them that now, then what's the point of going on? So,
Where's the fun in that?
Much fun here.
So, I mean, I'm not going to tell them
cards
how I
close
feel.
to your chest.
I think my questions indicated that I had concerns, and, I'll tell you one distinct advantage of having experts, particularly experts that you worked with before, is that they have a lot of credibility, and we've worked with these experts before, and certainly in contrast to the previous application, this is a very thorough application, but I can't tell you how I feel.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe Mike.
Yeah.
Andy, you got a minute to spend?
Put your best foot forward, Glenn.
Before we go forward there?
Okay.
One second, we're going to take this one.
Yes. We should go outside?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm cool with that.
Okay, we're going to be finishing our meeting, so any conversations outside? Here it is.
Oh, and you can make me a copy of the meeting, so to speak?
Yeah, I can make a copy.
Okay. Like a DVD or something like that, so.
It's also available on the website.
He doesn't have access, so
Oh,
I
okay.
can try that.
We have no,
That's the next improvement, Bob.
bring me back to the marijuana meat that
We're going to need it for the next meeting. Okay. We done, Mike?
I think he's just collecting his map. Okay.
Okay. Open discussion, John.
Just a quick update, we have received at least one request now for Public Works resources in Estes Park, so we're working on that, and we'll keep you posted as we deploy.
So what will that mean? Do you have some idea in terms of the resources that?
Not yet. I just got the email. You know, we have some heavy equipment and operators that we identified, including 4x4 graders, loaders, dump trucks. I'm sure it's going to be, you know, one of those resources along or more along with operators. So I'll keep you posted. I don't know the nature of it yet.
Okay. Is that it for you?
Yeah.
Board, any open discussion? Michael?
We had an ACRA meeting on Tuesday, and we had a presentation, not a presentation, but we had a resolution presented to us by Warren Klug, essentially about immigration and immigration reform and immigration, urging the Congress to move ahead on immigration reform. And at that meeting, a young lady, Sophia Clark, was there representing Colorado Immigration Reform Committee, I think, CIRC. And I said that I would ask the commissioners if they would have a work session with Sophia and approve the resolution or something similar to it, encouraging Congress to get to work on the immigration reform. So I'm just asking you if we can schedule some time for that.
Yeah, I wonder, I would certainly support the resolution. I just wonder how valuable that would be, since we had a very good work session with Senator Bennett's key staff on that issue. And of course, Senator Bennett is involved.
Well, I can certainly just bring the resolution that ACRA had, and I'll give it to John, and we can pass the resolution.
That'd be my thought anyway.
I would be happy to do that as well. You know, Club 20 actually unanimously approved a resolution in support of Senator Bennett's immigration bill as well. And so I think the groundwork has been well laid. It's a very thoughtful process. So
This was mostly aimed at Representative Scott Tipton, who it hasn't indicated that he's on board with immigration reform, and not at the senators. So it's particularly aimed at him to show that they're, and this particular issue that Sophia Clark brought forward had numerous signatories, including the mayor of Denver and numerous service organizations, and then presented to Scott Tipton to say, please, would you consider getting on board with this?
Yeah, I would move forward, have a resolution brought forward to us to look at and move forward in that way. I don't see a need for a work session on it. Rob?
I'm in favor of it, and I read the ACRA resolution. I will say that it doesn't have a lot of teeth in it. It's basically saying we're in favor of doing something in addition to what we're doing, and that's about all it really says. It doesn't really define what to do.
I think the reason it doesn't is because it's a very complicated.
I agree. I agree.
And they couldn't possibly outline what needs to be done. However,
I agree.
Action needs to be taken, and at this point, our Representative Tipton hasn't indicated that he's friendly to any action on immigration reform. So it was an urging of these organizations for Representative Tipton to get on board. That's all it was.
yeah. Perhaps, John, if you could get a copy of the Club 20 resolution as well, because it had more of the detail in it and supported the components of Senator Bennett's bill. The real challenge has been the Senate has put together a complete package with multiple steps, and the House of Representatives has said they want to break it into individual components and pass them one at a time. And so maybe we can pass a resolution that's a marriage of the two, that includes why we support a full package going forward and getting done now, and again aimed towards
That's essentially what the resolution
yeah
is.
so pull the two together and then just do it, I think, under MOIs or something like that.
Okay. Steve?
I would want to see more wording also on what is being proposed. The article in the newspaper mentioned a bill that has been put forward by the House of Representatives, and I would be very dubious about that if it wasn't like Senator Bennett's bill with, by and large, Senator Bennett's bill maybe with some minor modifications, but I'd like to see the wording what is actually being proposed. And I'm totally in favor of moving forward with an immigration bill that is a sensible one and, fulfills the things that we would like to see happen.
Okay. All right, so we'll bring that forward.
Yeah, and I think what I'll try and do is get those two resolutions, put them in as an MOI next week. We can pick some language, and then at the next regular meeting, we can have a resolution to adopt.
Yeah, and to Steve's request, if there's a short version of what single bill the House of Representatives is looking at now, we can compare and contrast, basically.
And it seems like the main thing is we want to get it on board with ACRA and with our local community.
Yeah.
Without getting too much involved in.
Yeah, we're not trying to
details.
craft an immigration bill
Yeah.
as much as have a comprehensive immigration bill. I mean, one of the reasons that it's stalled in the House is they're saying, well, let's e-verify first. Well, if you don't have a path for some sort of legalization, all you do is penalize people. And who's going to come forward for that? So it has to be a comprehensive plan. And it's simply asking our representative to get on board with a comprehensive plan.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thanks. Anybody else have anything for open discussion? Okay, I would entertain a
Motion to adjourn?
Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you, Grassroots.
Thanks, Grassroots.